Let's see, next, please. Next. So we've been a Western Hummingbird Partnership for about 12 years. And unfortunately, we haven't been doing a very good job because most of the populations of Western hummingbirds are declining rather precipitously. And so we are trying to broaden our outreach and include all of you and look forward to your contributions to hummingbird conservation. But this is the crew that's been working on it so far. I'm with US Forest Service, as is Deanna Williams and Jamie Ratliff. John Alexander's with Klamath Bird Observatory. Sari Contreras is with the University of Guadalajara, Oxford. Christine Bishop is with Environment and Climate Change Canada. Jeff Geipel with Point Blue Conservation Science. And Sue Bonfield is our fearless leader from Environment for the Americas in Boulder, Colorado, which is unfortunately the home of forest fires lately. Next. So we envision a future with thriving populations of Western hummingbirds. We're happy to phrase that a little differently if you are felicitous with a phrase, and we've had fun with the Spanish translation, so let us know how you like this vision. And we hope you share this vision with us and will help us work towards it. If you don't know much about Western Hummingbird Partnership, please visit our website. There's a lot of very varied information on the website that's been added over the last dozen years, but we're happy to put more up if you have good hummingbird information that you would like to see us share through this site. Next. So I'm very excited by doing this conservation plan, and one of the reasons is that the Western Hummingbird Partnership is in a position where we can put the conservation plan to work. There's a few conservation plans that are out there that were good plans at the time, but they haven't been adopted by any group. So a plan quickly gets old and it's not very helpful if it isn't put into action. So we pledge as the Western Hummingbird Partnership to promote an action plan that follows this conservation plan, to facilitate working groups, to update the plan regularly, to report back to all of you and anyone else interested as the plan progresses, to facilitate communication with anyone interested in hummingbird conservation, and where funding permits, initiate collaborative conservation projects consistent with recommendations from the plan. And mentioning funding, the US Forest Service has been the main funder of the Western Hummingbird Partnership so far, but if you by any miracle have access to money or have thoughts about people who have money who might care about the decline in populations of Western hummingbirds, we look forward to more funding partners as well as more contributing partners. Next. So there was a report 2 years ago about 3 billion birds of North America have disappeared in the last 50 years. And that's an awful lot of birds. And unfortunately, a large number of those birds were Western hummingbirds. And that's why we're here today. Next. So these are the broadly distributed Western species. And you can see that 5 out of the 7 species are listed as birds of conservation concern in the United States. Anna's hummingbird is interesting because it's the one species that's increasing dramatically. And so maybe we understand Anna's hummingbird better and why it's doing so well, it will help us deal with the ones that aren't doing as well. And then black-chinned hummingbird is the other species that we're not as concerned about. And then we have these 4 species that are usually in the genus Celastrus, but not always, but are 4 species very closely related that are all on the birds of conservation concern list. And then Costas hummingbird, which is the most desert oriented hummingbird, which is also on US birds of conservation concern. And Canada is most concerned about Rufous hummingbird. We've included some of these other species that aren't currently found in Canada because with climate change, maybe Canada will be helpful to their conservation in the future. Next. So far, one of the contributions that we've done as Western Hummingbird Partnership is to look at the status of Rufous hummingbird. And as you can see from the previous slide, it's very important for us to add other species of Western hummingbirds to our work on Rufous hummingbird. In order to pursue that, we would like to expand the size of the Western Hummingbird Partnership and would be looking for probably one person from each of the 3 countries to join our steering committee. If that's something you'd be interested in, please let me or Sue know as we look to add some members to the committee. Next. I will pass it on to Foundations of Success.
We just want to say thank you to Foundations of Success for guiding us through this process and helping to get us to this point. I'm going to remind everybody before we go on of the next schedules, same time, same place, same link, same people, same faces, and we hope that you are here every day. If you could please change your names in your Zoom so that we can identify you, that would be great. So we have everybody's name, and even if you have room for your affiliation, that would be wonderful. So thank you. And I'll turn it over to Foundations, Jacqueline and Armando.
Thank you, Susan, and welcome everybody. Bienvenidos. I'll be speaking or talking in English this time around, but when we are in the breakout groups, I'll be speaking in Spanish. So I have a very short presentation regarding the ground rules, what is expected, and the overview of the approach. I'm going to share my screen. Give me just 1 second to get it started. Portion. There I go. Okay. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, looks good.
Okay, great. So I'm going to give you a very short conservation standards overview, what we do at FOS and so on. There are some ground rules though that I want to state right away so that we can have fun, as the last point says. Please, we, as Susan pointed out and Greg too, we need your participation, your collaboration. So actively engage, try not to be distracted. So turn off cell phones, avoid multitasking and the likes. I know we're in a virtual world nowadays and that implies a lot of multitasking. Let's try not to do it during this 4 hours. Participate, but please don't dominate. There are a lot of voices here and we want to hear all of them. Put on the video if you feel comfortable, and your microphone, mute your microphone when you're not speaking. That would be great. Let's try to focus on solutions to the challenges that we have ahead, offer specific suggestions. So even if you're criticizing something, maybe an alternative, an option, an opportunity, or some suggestion for solution would be great. Please respect and value other participants' contributions. And remember that we're taught it's not the person, it's the idea that we're trying to share here, and thus criticizing. And for us, because we're so many in the room right now, silence means agreement. So please speak up or write in the chat before moving to the next topic if you disagree with something, if you don't feel comfortable. And everything should lead to having a lot of fun. One more thing before I forget, we will be sharing these Google Slides with you and other Google Slides presentations. We will be working on Google Slides, so please participate from your computer. If you're using a smartphone or a tablet or an iPad, please don't open Google Slides there. It's a bug or something, and it just does not work well. And we lose a lot of data that way. So it would be great if you could use your computer to participate. There are other ways. If you don't have a computer right now, don't worry, you can use the Zoom chat, you can send us messages, and we will be able to include it in the Google Slides. Okay. Is everybody agreeing with these ground rules? Is there something that we're missing? Thank you, Nancy, and thank you, Jamie, and yeah, silence is agreement. So let's move on. This is a very short and very fast presentation. I'm going to try and speak slowly for Claudia, but we're going to be moving along. So first, I want to tell you a little bit about Foundations of Success, what we call the FOS Collective. Our mission is to amplify the collective impact of the global conservation community. We are 3 distinct branches, but we collaborate together, we work together. Right now, we're working together from FOS US, from FOS Latin America and Caribbean, and from FOS Europe. And we provide training and we provide coaching. We develop frameworks and tools for better conservation planning, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. We facilitate collaborative learning, and we're trying to build capacity for the future. It's very much aligned with what you guys are doing right now. This time around, it's me. That's when I had long hair a couple of years ago. And Jacqueline, who's right there. Can you raise your hand, Jacqueline? Yeah, that's it. So Jacqueline and I will be helping and facilitating and coaching you through this process. So where do we come from? The conservation standards has a very big community. The conservation standards are a set of tools that were developed by the Conservation Measures Partnership. It draws on the best known practices in the conservation world. It is open source and has a common language. I'll get back to that. And it is used around the world. These are principles and practices to foster effective conservation. The Conservation Measures Partnership is a set of people. It's kind of like the Western Hummingbird Partnership, set of NGOs, government agencies, funders, and private businesses that got together, all of them conservation oriented, and they tried collectively to generate or guide the conservation around the world. We are the stewards of the conservation standards, so we change them according to changes in context, changes in tools, and things we are learning. And we seek better ways to design, to manage, and measure the impacts of our conservation actions. This is a slide that has all the Conservation Measures Partnership members, now the current ones, and you can see that there are several funders or donors, there are several NGOs, there's some companies, and there are some universities inside that they all help maintain and update the conservation standards. One more tool that it's important for us is Muradi. It's an adaptive management software that was created. It has an online and a desktop version. We're moving towards more and more the online version, maybe because of the last 2 years and what we've seen, and it helps collaborate a lot. And this Muradi, you can also go to the website, muradi.org, and it has a conservation actions and measures library. We also call it CAMO. And there you can find a set of examples, you can find tools and guides and guiding principles or generalized theories of change, generalized situation analysis that can help you and your organizations see what other teams have been doing. It's a way of sharing, it's a way of learning, and it's a way of not starting from scratch every time we do something in conservation. Said this, Muradi is very, very important because it helps teams implement the conservation standards. You will see Muradi in action today, and everything that Jacqueline and I have been moving forward with Susan and Greg has been done in Muradi's and part of it. So you will be able to see how it works. That said, and as we pointed out, the idea is adaptive management or good practices for conservation projects and programs. We try to ask the right questions that help us improve conservation projects. These are the 3 questions or the main questions. Are we achieving an impact? Are we doing the right things? And are we doing them well? As you see, are we doing well has more to do with the planning. Are we doing the right things has to do with the strategic, with the planning, sorry, with the implementation. Are we doing the right things has to do with the strategic planning. And are we achieving an impact has to do with our vision and our goals. And one of the things that we try the most to learn is under which conditions does something work, and try to get to those conditions, because we know that under those conditions, things will start working. We also have another question, a very important question that we will be trying to solve during this workshop, that has to do with adaptive management. Are we being explicit about our assumptions? Every time we have a goal and we have a strategy or a strategic approach or some intervention, we are assuming certain things, from the big assumption that this will work to the assumption that what we will be doing, our actions, will lead to some outcomes, and these outcomes will finally lead to our goal. So we want to make our assumptions explicit. So in this case, it's another bird example. It's a seabird colony, and our strategy is to eliminate rats from the islands. And we know that rats are coming on board ships to these islands via the different ships and the different trade, commerce and trade. So how can we make this explicit? How can we think about the assumptions that we're making? Does eliminating rats or stopping rats from getting on board ships that go to the islands, how does it come to really affect positively or impact positively the birds that are reproducing or that are breeding on that island? So we will try to make this explicit through, in every single strategy that you guys choose and select, we'll try to make explicit, how does that strategy really lead to the goals that we set ourselves? And that is where the conservation standards fall into place. As I pointed out before, this was the conservation standards at the short term for the open standards for the practice of conservation was developed by the leading organizations in conservation. It draws on the best known practices that we've had, and that there's quite a bit out there. It's open source, it has a common language, and it has been used around the world by donors, academic trainings, universities, conservation NGOs, wildlife agencies, and community groups as well. Just to showcase, we all manage similar concepts, but we might be using different words. So one of the main objectives of the conservation standards was to try to find better ways to communicate across projects, programs, and partners. Here you see some of the examples of how each one of these institutions or organizations calls the same things that we are working on. Just as an example, conservation targets can be called conservation outcomes, focal targets, focal conservation targets, long-term goals, or landscape species. So in trying to unify or standardize language, which is one way that will be recurrent in our work across 3 countries, it is very, very important. So conservation standards is a set of tools, and we have organized them in 5 steps. This does not mean that we have to start in step 1. You can jump in at any place of this circle, but I will be presenting them in that sequence of step 1 to step 5, just for pedagogy, I would say, to make it as clear as possible. So we start with assessments in our first steps. We will try to define the purpose of the project and the team that will be part of this project. We will then go on to scope. What is the scope of the project? What is the scope of where we will be working and what we want to achieve? What is the vision? As Susan and Greg showed, you guys have already a vision, so we can work on that vision. And we have kind of a clear scope encompassing all the breeding and non-breeding areas of these Western hummingbirds. We then would look at targets and viability of these targets, in this case, the 6 or 7 species of hummingbirds that we've been working with, and how do they find themselves? Things like the document that Greg showed about the status of the rufous hummingbird is very, very important to acknowledge and to use that information as how are our hummingbirds, how are our targets going. We then assess the threats. What is happening? This is one of the things that some of you participated in, looking at what are identifying those threats and thinking about what actually is happening. What are those factors, those drivers that are reducing the viability of our targets? And we finally analyze the situation. We come to a point where we know the context and we know what's happening. Once we have this assessment kind of figured out, and we can depict the situation analysis, then we move on to the plan and we start planning. When we plan, we try first to identify strategies. What are we going to do for these conservation targets and to reduce these threats? And then we try to make our assumptions as explicit as possible so that we know what is it that we're thinking, the logic behind the strategy that we are trying to develop. We look at goals and objectives. What are the things we want to reach at the end of the project? What are the things that we need to reach and measure and throughout the project? And we come up with a monitoring and an operational plan to know that we are moving forward in this plan, but also to know what we have to do. Rapidly, we then go into implementation, which is the part that we hope that this whole planning process will lead to. And this implementation will start including things like work plans and timelines, budgets, obviously, what resources do we have? Then we started implementing and we monitor following our monitoring plan so that we know that we're moving in the right direction. As we monitor and as we implement, we start analyzing the data that we get. So we prepare data based on that monitoring plan, based on our theory of change, our assumptions that have been explicitly delineated, and we analyze the results. How is it going? Are we moving in the right direction? Are our assumptions, do they hold? Or do we need to make changes? Do we need to, based on those results, do some adaptation because we're not going the way we thought we would be going? So this is a very important part of the cycle that and the tools that I'm presenting. And finally, for me, the most important part as part of the conservation community is a sharing, is a documenting and sharing and looking for learning opportunities. So are we still there?
We can still see.
Oh yeah, there you are. Sorry, something happened to my Google Slides. So we document the learning. So we document what we adapted, what went right, what went wrong, what didn't work, what worked. And we try to share the learning with a bigger or broader community. And in doing that, we foster the learning. We foster this growing community of conservationists that need this learning so that we can start making better decisions and implementing better projects. I'm going to do something more just as a segue to the next part, which will be a situation analysis that Jacqueline will show. And I'll hand it over for questions if you have them. But I would just like to say that all this starts from us understanding what is conservation success. So conservation success in trying to conserve an ecosystems, ecological processes or species, and harmonizing the relationships between humans and nature derives from us having like three big chunks of things: a healthy status of biodiversity, the biodiversity we care about, and the benefits and services for humans. Those are normally our biodiversity goals. Then we, at the absence of threats, reducing or changing things that drive human behaviors and the human behaviors that are directly impacting in a negative way the biodiversity and our biodiversity goals. And we have the actions and capacity, strong capacity for people to take action, things we can do to change that situation. This is kind of the summary of everything we do. We have our goals, we have our vision, what we want to conserve, what we want to really be able to support, the things that we have to change, the factors, the drivers, the contributing factors, the threats, and what are we going to do to change them. And this is inside of really attaining a conservation success. And I would like to add a couple of more things. This is a very large scale planning process because it spans 3 countries. We are trying to bring expert people together, that is you guys, to collaborate in generating this conservation plan. And we have done some work so far. Jacqueline will show you some of it. We will be showing you among ourselves, we will be showing you some other stuff. But however, everything is a draft. Nothing is written in stone. And as such, we can modify things accordingly. Okay, so don't feel at any point that what we have written or what we show you is going to be the last word we have about it. We can change everything according to what we come up with. You are the experts and we are here to coach you. Thank you. I don't know if you have any questions.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Armando. I think we will leave it open for a minute for questions if they're about the conservation standards or more about the process. Please feel free to speak up or write in the chat.
It was either very clear or not clear at all.
We'll go with very clear.
Okay, good.
It'll hopefully all make a lot more sense as we work through the different steps of the conservation standards. And great, I see some chat in there saying that it was clear. So great job. Thanks, Armando. So as he mentioned, we're going to jump into walking through some of the kind of the one piece of material that has been started and drafted, and I'll share my screen. And just to give you an idea of the process after this is we are going to be going into breakout groups actually to work on feedback and revisions. So I'm just presenting again that first draft, and we will have time in breakout groups to actually get all of your expertise. Hopefully everyone can see this. I'll jump into presenter mode in just a minute. I do just want to note that throughout our conversations over today and the next 2 days, there will probably be some topics that are just too large for us to actually get to a resolution in the actual workshop itself. And so we will have a space that we can always come back to with topics or questions or different, just anything that needs to continue to be addressed either throughout the next few days or beyond the workshop itself. So please just note if we refer to a bike rack or a bicycle rack, that's just kind of our holding station. So Armando mentioned this purpose of a situation model. And the situation model is for us to think about the current context of what's happening across the landscape for our scope, which are these Western migrating hummingbird species. Okay, so we have different species that we're focused on. You can see them all listed here. You don't have to be able to read or focus in on these different species, but these are what we think of as our conservation targets, right? So what are we trying to protect? What are we trying to make healthier? And we have these different populations of Western migrating hummingbird species. So we've started to think about, well, what are the biggest threats, direct threats, right? Kind of what are humans doing in order to threaten these species, right? Threaten our targets. And we've lumped them together. We have some habitat destruction activities that have come out. Agriculture was a big one, mining, urban development. We have habitat degradation activities, right? Invasive and non-native species. A big one is fire, use of pesticides, overgrazing. And then there are different direct threats that are leading directly to mortality, right? A direct loss of individuals, whether those are collisions or domestic animals, hunting, entrapment. Okay, so these are lumped together just so we have a starting point on thinking about what's impacting our targets. Additionally, you can see that we'll have climate change effects, right? And there are numerous climate change effects that I'm sure are impacting these species, but a few of the primary climate change effects have been called out here. Changes in precipitation and humidity, fire frequency and severity, extreme western winds, and storm events. Again, all of this can be added to or adopted. Some of those threats, like I said, will go directly to our targets, like this direct loss of individuals. And some of them, it helps to kind of map out what is the effect on the environment or on the ecosystem that's impacting our target. So is maybe some of our destruction activities are leading to loss of habitat and therefore changes in floral resources and insects, which are then impacting our species, right? So just a few of those really big environmental effects have been called out here. As we display this, and like I said, before we jump into those breakout groups, we'll actually hear from experts who are going to give these mini presentations on some of the different factors that you'll see throughout this model. So don't be surprised if, you know, these seem familiar. We'll come back and we'll hear more about pesticides. We'll hear more about, you know, the loss of floral resources or habitat. And hopefully that resonates with you all, and you can see that this model represents some of those topics that will be presented. So on our right, we have our targets. In the pink there, we have those direct threats and their effects on the environment. And then one thing that's great to do is think about, well, where are these threats coming from, right? What is contributing to these threats? So you might see that on the left in orange here, maybe mining is coming from that increased demand for minerals. Maybe we have an increased demand for local food, increased demand for housing. And we can continue to build out with all of you as far left as it makes sense for us to think about what is contributing to these threats. And a lot of this is so when we're thinking about interventions, right? When we're thinking about those strategies, we can think about what we are trying to mitigate, right? What are we trying to change and affect? Is a strategy going to directly affect the loss of individuals? Is it going to help with reducing a certain demand? And this situation model definitely makes that a little bit easier. For habitat degradation, we might see things such as maybe habitat removal is increasing, right? Those invasive species. We may have other things where there's landscape aesthetics, right? And an increased global demand for food. Some of these aren't going to be able to be tackled, right, by this group. They're very large ideas, but we want to represent and hear where these threats are coming from. Additionally, right, we might have cultural influences affecting some of these threats, demand for specimens, rodent control. These are just showing what is leading to the direct threats. We do want to note that we haven't done it yet, but in these orange boxes, we can also note opportunities. So if we think of opportunities that we can add, we'll often denote that with a little plus sign before them and show that even though this looks a little bit like doom and gloom, right? We're creating a model of all these threats and everything that's leading to them. There's also opportunities throughout that we can highlight. So again, we will jump back to this when we go into breakout groups. Armando, Susan, Greg, is there anything you want to add about the development of the situation model or what we'll be looking for?
I just wanted to say that, we set up the structure just to make it easy for everyone to contribute their expertise to it. And even this structure is subject to change as people wiser than those of us who started this give us better ideas. We can improve the structure and really focus in on the most important things we can do to help hummingbirds.
Great. And that's a great point, Greg, is this situation model is really just supposed to be a snapshot of the current context. And we're looking, across species. If there's anything specific to a species, we can call that out. And when we jump into those breakout groups, we can also note, if something is more or less related to, breeding season, non-breeding season, kind of the migratory routes, different subgroups that we'll be jumping into.
And I'll just
Great.
add that
Yeah.
in addition to what Greg had to say is to recognize that we understand that some of these threats and factors might differ across the geographic range that we're working in. And that's why we depend on your expertise as to inform this visualization.
Right. And we can add to it, but we do want to keep in mind, and Armando and I will facilitate the groups through these breakout groups. We do want to keep in mind that a model can only be so useful if it's not just overly detailed to the point where it loses its meaning. So we'll try and find that balance between really making sure you all feel like the species are represented, but not getting so far into the weeds that the model then just becomes overly confusing. Okay, well, while I have this up, I do want to ask if there's any questions or comments from the rest of the group. Feel free to, again, just jump off mute or feel free to write something in the chat with the reminder that we will go into a lot more detail about the situation model in about an hour. Okay. Well, I'll stop sharing and I'll pass it back to Susan so that she can introduce these presentations. And again, you can just keep in mind this model here and you'll see some representation for these kind of flash presentations or speed presentations that are coming your way. And we'll make sure to take a break too partway through those presentations.
Thanks, Jacqueline. Thanks, Armando. We really appreciate the work that you've put into this. So we're excited to move forward. And thank you to all of those of you who have put together a presentation about your work addressing some of these threats to migratory hummingbirds. Again, we do have some information in here and some presenters who will be sharing information that is not to be shared outside of this meeting. So we're getting the real benefit of participation in this meeting by having some data that has not been published. So during those times, again, I will pause the recording and again, please keep that to us. I will take Armando and Jacqueline off of the spotlight. And on your own screens, if you want to, you can also choose I think you can choose to have the person who's speaking spotlighted, so you have some options as to who you want to see. Otherwise, I'll be working to highlight the speaker for each of these presentations. I did a small change to the order. We're going to have Matt Betts come on first because he has to unfortunately leave us for a while to go to a meeting. So I'm going to let Matt Betts start, and then we'll move forward with the rest of the presentations according to the order that I gave them to you in my last email. So Matt, are you there?
I'm here, Susan. Yeah,
Great.
thanks very much. Just to note, that's actually not me. That's my former PhD student, Thomas.
Oh no, shoot, I got the wrong picture.
In the last couple of years. So yeah, thanks very much for inviting me. Do you have my slide handy next?
I do.
Great, thanks. And just scroll through all these if you don't mind.
Okay.
Yeah, hi everybody, and looking forward to an exciting few days to come. I'm really thrilled about the topics in this workshop. So I've been asked to give a really brief 3-minute overview of how forest management might affect hummingbirds in the West. And our research is really focused on what you see in the middle panel there, how intensive management, forest harvesting, and forest succession have affected rufous hummingbird up here in Oregon, where I'm from. And so we've asked a few questions. One, how does the intensive forest management you see in that middle panel, clear cutting, herbicide spraying, and then rapid growth of plantations affect populations of birds in general, but particularly rufous hummingbird? And then also on federal lands, we all know since the Northwest Forest Plan in the early 90s, we've seen a real signal of succession toward older forest and closed canopy forest that could be reducing resources for any species associated with flowering plants, including rufous hummingbird. And then third, we've been looking at how climate change could interact with these habitat changes, these forest changes on the ground. And so over the last 10 years, we've spent a lot of time implementing an experiment, a 10-year experiment with different herbicide levels in clear cuts like the ones you see in the middle panel. We've been using remote sensing. Those are the images you see on the left and the right, to measure habitat changes for rufous hummingbird and other hummingbirds, including ruby-throated, actually over time, to test these ideas. So now I'll describe the results to you. Overall, as you'd probably expect, herbicide can have really strong negative effects on hummingbirds, especially in the first 4 years following herbicide spray. It's not, we don't think, due to the direct effects of the chemical, but rather the fact that these chemicals are designed to reduce competing vegetation to Douglas fir, which happens to be the very resources that rufous hummingbirds use. These are flowering plants, of course, that would naturally grow up in these clear cuts. So and the good news is that after about 4 years, we see populations recovering in those clear cut areas once herbicide has stopped being used. The other element we found, we've used a breeding bird survey to look at rufous hummingbirds. And as probably many of you know, rufous hummingbirds are declining at about 4% per year, which is around the rate of the spotted owl, the northern spotted owl. Those declines tend to be steeper in landscapes that have lost broadleaf early seral forests, so forest that's particularly young. And that loss can happen as a function of either succession, trees getting much older and shading out flowering plants, or as a result of intensive forest management in the way of herbicide spraying. And to make matters a bit worse, sorry to be the doom and gloom person here, that habitat loss due to succession and spraying is amplified in landscapes. These are breeding bird survey landscapes that have experienced rapid warming over the last 35 years. So I just want to emphasize that the importance of these interacting effects. In Jacqueline's slide, she showed all these effects as contributing to potentially to population declines of hummingbirds. It is really important that we think about how these stressors could interact and have amplified effects on populations. So that's what this climate interacting with habitat loss effect seems to be. So to end on a bright note, there are ways we can fix this. Climate change is a difficult thing to fix, as we all know, but there are different sorts of management we can do, less intensive management with less reliance on herbicide. We can think about creating early sterile forest in some of these 40 and 50-year-old plantations on federal land to try and restore more old growth characteristics that are have patchy openings and might have food plants in those openings. So there are some optimistic things we can do management-wise to encourage and trying to restore rufous hummingbird populations. I could get into meadow restoration as well, but I don't have the time, so I'll stop there. Thanks very much, everyone, for listening. Thanks, Susan, for inviting me.
Susan, you're on mute.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Thanks, Matt. We appreciate that. If you can hang in there for a moment, we have a couple more presentations and then we'll take questions. So if you need to leave, take off, but if you can stay a little bit longer, that would be great. Next, we have a session on population trends. And Oren, I do see that you joined. So I'm going to stop my screen and let you share your slides. And so our next speaker is Simon English. Simon, are you out there?
Yeah, thanks for having me here to talk.
Okay, let me find you. I have to find you to spotlight you. I'm actually not finding your name in the list, Simon. Are you under a different name?
I think I was able to do it.
Were you? Did you?
Susan.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. All right, Simon.
Great that Matt Betts introduced the breeding bird survey. We were just analyzing this same data set. We were taking a higher resolution look at the species trends, like hummingbird species trends throughout North America, and finding consistent patterns that are also consistent with what Oren just presented from the eBird data set. So everything is looking like we all agree. Importantly, in this data set, this breeding bird survey data set, which is collected by skilled surveyors and skilled volunteers and biologists for identification, we were analyzing 2 time periods and comparing. So we cover the first 50 years, nearly half century of since the program began in the 1970s, and then in the last decade up to the conclusion of the study, which represents about approximately a 3-generation time for hummingbirds, likely more than that, but this is an important time period for species conservation programs like the IUCN. And then as you just heard from the 2 presenters, we were looking at rates of change in populations and also the magnitude of population change. So on this color scale, we have the rate of change in a population represented by the darker hues in these bars, and then on the y-axis, the magnitude of population change. So across all the species that are represented here, we see in the last decade a higher rate of change. So steeper declines in the Selasphorus genus. That includes the rufous and Allen's hummingbirds. And then importantly, also we see what had not yet been reported in ruby-throated hummingbirds. We're now seeing a significant decline in their populations as well. And then, of course, as most of you likely already know, the Anna's hummingbirds are expanding their range, and this is characterized in the data set by what appears as a population increase or a steeply increasing rate of change. And this study was has just been published, so you can find these all online, and the work done with my colleagues at Environment Canada. And I think that covers this slide. I don't know if the next one is follows immediately or, yeah, okay. So in this next study, we were working with colleagues in California, looking at 2 three sites representing two habitat types in California. So Stevenson Bridge up here and Scotts Valley represent coastal California bird conservation region, while Indian Peak represents the interior montane Sierra Nevada region. We found that, by the way, these are banding data. I'm not sure if I said that already. So we, with these data, are able to take a closer look at demographic rates. So not just population trends, but get information about the sexes and survivorship by age class and species and region. So we found along this coastal region significantly lower male survivorship as compared to females. And this was supported by the sex ratios that we found throughout the entire study range, where females had, or there were female biased sex ratios in adults, while juveniles had male biased sex ratios. And so the mechanism that we partly attribute this to is males not surviving with the same probability as females, driving this difference in sex ratios between age classes. Then we also observe in this coastal region lower proportions of transient individuals, while in the mountain range there's a higher proportion of transients. We weren't able to look at age class differences in the proportions of transients, although we now understand that this coastal habitat is important for transient or is important for migrating juveniles, while the interior is important habitat for migrating adult males and females. And then note that we also see these strongest declines in the coastal habitat, and that was found in the BBS data set that we analyzed in the previous project, and appears consistent with what Oren was just presenting. So the next steps in this project, I must have gone over, but I'm almost done here. The next steps in this project, we're analyzing other demographic parameters, including recruitment rates and survivorship on across a larger spatial extent. So in BC, and our preliminary results indicate that through time, consistent with the findings of the BBS study, we observe a decline in survivorship trends.
All right. Thank you so much, Simon. I'm going to turn it over to our next speaker, Anna Drake. And Anna, we'll let you take it away.
Hi, all. I'm excited to be here. Today, I'm going to be talking about a project that Environment Canada was involved in with the Hummingbird project here in British Columbia. We used mark recapture data from this banding project, the Hummingbird project, to look at sex-specific survival rates in birds breeding in British Columbia. This is rufous hummingbirds. So what you see here is a time series. It's going from 1998 to 2017 with sex-specific apparent annual survival for adults. And just with the time series, I want to point out a few things. You can see, as Simon was saying, that we see higher female interannual survival than males. I'll also break this down. We split the population into birds that are breeding in the British Columbia interior and those that are breeding in the British Columbian coast. So we had a larger data set on the coast, which enabled us to do more with it. And you can see it's a longer time series. So another thing I want to point out is that we don't see any interannual trend in survival. So there's no increase, there's no decline. This is inconsistent with, again, what Simon was saying about an accelerating decline in abundance for rufous hummingbirds. So we're not seeing that reflected in apparent annual survival of the adults. If you could move forward, there's a bit of an animation here, Susan. So I want to point out some things. So for the coastal time series, we're able to look at some factors on migration to see if they were associated with the apparent annual survival. So we looked at fire years on the flyway, looking at the amount of area that was burned within the migratory corridor of rufous hummingbirds. So if you advance again, Susan, the years shown here were the worst years on the flyway in our time series for burn. And you can see that there's no reflection in apparent annual survival there that we can see. And we tested this statistically as well, but I'm just flagging it here with the time series. So no association there. Okay, step forward again, Susan, thanks. Oh, one more. Yes, okay, so one of the other things we thought would impact and is believed to impact floral resource availability during fall migration is snowpack in the Sierra Nevada and the Rockies, with the idea that years with higher snowpack, there's more water available to alpine plants, and this means there's better conditions for migrating hummingbirds. And the circled points here are some of the worst years for snowpack, particularly in the Sierra Nevada. These years were the historic low in snowpack within recorded history. It was the lowest snow accumulation, and you can see that we've got middling to high rufous hummingbird survival for both females and males. So that doesn't appear to be associated and also didn't hold up under statistical evaluation. And then one more that I'm going to talk about, if you move forward again, Susan. So this is a broader scale El Nino La Nina cycle where we expected La Nina years to be poor for rufous hummingbirds because of rainfall and food availability, as well as winds during migration, which can be more costly in La Nina years. And if you advance again, I'll show you the best and the worst years we considered using the index. And you can see the trend is actually in the direction we anticipated. So the worst year had lower apparent annual survival and the best year had higher. This did not achieve statistical significance in our data series. It was the one factor that we looked at that was in the direction we expected. And so just a few things to take from that, the survival rates we see here in the time series is actually comparable to ruby throat hummingbird survival during a period when ruby throat populations were increasing. One of the differences here with rufous hummingbirds is that they are single brooded, whereas ruby throats can have as many as 2 nests, I understand. So that may lead to a difference in their demographic response to having that kind of a survival rate, but it seems within the range of what we see in hummingbirds adult survival. This might suggest that what's maybe more strongly associated with declines in rufous hummingbirds is more to do with juvenile recruitment, which we weren't able to measure, and potentially productivity as well. And so I'll wrap up there. That's all published. You can see the citation in the bottom corner there if you want to see the paper. So thank you very much, guys.
Thank you, Anna. We appreciate that. Great presentation. And we're going to take a few moments for questions, and then we'll move to the next session. Then we're going to take a break because I know you've been sitting for a while, and then we'll do the last set of presentations and questions. So I see some activity in the chat box. I'll go to those first, and maybe I'll spotlight our speakers. If I can do both at the same time. We have a question for Simon. Have you found age-dependent migration in coastal versus mountains on both seasonal migrations or just fall southward?
stop me if I've misunderstood the question, but the data set that we were looking at is broken up by years. So we don't, in this data set, distinguish between like whether the birds are coming or going. We only are able to estimate demographic parameters based on whether a bird was observed in a given year. So is that clear? Does that answer the question?
I'll let, let's see if you can put in the chat box if that answered your question. That would be great.
That's great. Thank you.
All right, good. Yeah, verbally is also good. Let's see, Matt, I know you had to take off, so I just wanted to see if, I know there was a bunch of messages in the chat box for you about herbicides, and I wanted to see if you wanted to do that verbally.
Yeah, there were some really good questions about herbicides in the chat box. Mostly, what are they used for? What are they used for? And the answer is they're used to control vegetation that competes with crop trees. You can grow Douglas fir in the Coast Range of Oregon about 30% faster if you use herbicides, at least under the current regime. I'm hoping that there can be some alternatives to herbicides. As you know, the World Health Organization has deemed them a probable cause of cancer as well in humans. So yeah, it's not rocket science, I think, that if you reduce these plants that hummingbirds feed on, you're likely to see depressed populations. I'm just going to, I'm going to paste, because I didn't do a very good job with my slides, I'm going to paste some references in the chat window for people if they'd like, under the topics of intensive management in Oregon and Washington forests, and on climate change interacting effects with forest management.
Okay, thanks, Matt. If you have any more questions, you can put your hand up and we'll call on you, or you can put it in the chat box. Let's see, I thought there was a question for Oren, but I can't seem to find it. Or maybe it was just a comment regarding the data. All right, any other messages? So let's see, there's some chat going on about some of the species. Thanks for the references, Matt. Question for Oren, here we go. Is the eBird data insufficient to make any analysis further north in the range of Rufus?
So the range, so that was the one map that looked funny in terms of range. So we've got that dotted line at the top. I can't share, I'd show it to you again. Yeah. Let's see.
I'm still recording. Do you want me to stop the recording, Oren?
No, that's
Okay.
fine. That's fine.
Great. Thanks.
So it looks like this is the northern border of the United States with Canada here, but it's not. This is the northern border. So we do get up well into Canada, and beyond that line, we cannot make, that's about 55 degrees north latitude. So beyond there, we don't make predictions. Now this next year, I think we're trying to move that line a little further north. But for the current products we have, that's as far north as we get. But again, I've showed this to people before, and everybody thought that was the border, the U.S.-Canadian border, and it's not. That's down here. So we do get well into Canada, but again, that's as far north as we can get.
Okay.
Looks like
Greg.
there's a hand up.
Ana Gonzalez. Would you like to unmute? And
Buenos días. Tengo una pregunta para Orin y para Simón. Cuando estamos viendo el mapa de eBird, parece que las poblaciones del interior de Estados Unidos no están en declive. ¿Hay alguna diferencia de pronto en la conectividad migratoria o en la ruta que están tomando, o tienen alguna idea de por qué está esta diferencia en declive entre las poblaciones de la costa y del interior en Estados Unidos comparado con Canadá?
Okay, I got most of that, but not enough to make me feel confident. So Armando or Claudia, are you able to translate the question?
Oh, okay, sorry, I should have asked in English. I can ask in English. I was asking that in the map, in the EBER map, like there is a blue region of increase in the interior in the States. So I was wondering if, do we have any clue about what is happening between those different populations? Like why the ones in the interior in the States are not declining, like compare with the ones in the interior in Canada, because they seem like those are the only ones blue and everything else in the map is red.
Yeah, so we don't really dig into the why with this. There's, the data is there and will be available soon for anyone who wants to start digging into the why. This is just getting the trends themselves. So in terms of why this spot's different from that one, I couldn't tell you just based on what we've done.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Thanks for doing your own translation. Oren, one more question for you is how much statistical uncertainty is there in those estimates? Do you have spatially mapped uncertainty?
Yes, we do have spatially mapped uncertainty, and it differs by the 27 by 27 kilometer pixel. So we have uncertainty estimates for each dot essentially. And those are released with the with the data when that'll be released with the paper, and it you can get that with all of that stuff. If you want to just see that, I can also get it for you.
If there are any more questions in Spanish, that's fine. Just let us know that you'll be asking in Spanish so we can move to the Spanish translation line.
And I think, Susan, sorry to jump in, but I think if you know throughout that you would want something to be translated from Spanish to English or vice versa, you can just click that globe and keep it on throughout the webinar. So I have mine just clicked on English, and whenever there's a translation into English, then I'll hear that.
Okay, great. Thanks for that clarification, Jacqueline. So if anybody's having trouble with that, please let us know if you can't see your interpretation globe. Okay. Christine is asking Anna and Simon, recruitment and or survival to adulthood really key in the first year of life versus once adults and then they are doing okay. Can you comment on that? I'm hoping I translated your question okay, Christine.
Yep, sounds good. I just like to hear both of them on this, and perhaps Oren as well. I don't know. I think he's looking more at just occurrence.
Simon, do you want to start or?
Sure. So in the next stage of the project that the projects that I've been involved with is exactly that, to look at these, like recruitment specifically, and compare it through with survivorship through time. So recruitment, again, our preliminary results, we are observing in the banding data set, the large banding data set that we have analyzed, declining trend, significant trend in recruitment and survival both. Now, one of the interesting and important considerations is that we aren't able to, one of the limitations of the data set that we have, we're not able to separate this out by age class. So, or separating it out by age class didn't improve the model. I don't want to get too into like the statistical aspects of this, but so we can't comment on that at this time, but it's consistent with the like these previously published reports of how birds are migrating, juveniles are migrating in along the coast. We see strong declines along the coast, and if birds aren't making it past their first year to sexual maturity, then they aren't being recruited into the population, and that could be one plausible mechanism driving population declines. I don't know if Anna, you want to?
Yeah, so I guess I'll just follow with that with our time series in BC is that, as Simon has said, that there seems to be this like steepening decline in rufous hummingbirds, and or trend is, there's no trend in our survivorship data. We would expect that, I think, that, or at least some sort of a shift in survival towards lower survival rates if adults were driving that increase, or the increasing decline, I mean. And we looked at various migratory factors. We're only able to get at adult survival here. And as Simon's saying again, also that the juveniles are using different corridors, and possibly corridors where they're getting exposed to more habitat loss or more pesticide exposure, all sorts of things. They're in lowlands, whereas the adults are tending to use the mountain corridors. And so I think, yeah, we would suggest to me that we need to be looking at recruitment of the juveniles, and even whether they're being produced or not. Like, I don't know whether we've seen declining productivity as well.
So I'll say one thing about that as well. I'm not obviously well-versed in rufous hummingbird biology as you guys are, but this problem seems to be tailor-made for an integrated population model. And it seems like you guys have all the pieces, given the recruitment studies, the survival studies, and now at least we have BBS and eBird trends that could contribute to that too, right? You'd be able to estimate juvenile survival, right? The whole thing's like a big algebra problem, right? If something's missing, you can estimate it given the other parameters. So that seems like something that would be super interesting to work on with a species. And I have done this with eBird data before for tricolored blackbirds, and we're working on it with others too. So.
All right. Thank you so much to all of you. We're gonna move forward. I really appreciate your presentations, answering the questions. If you continue to have questions, put them in the chat box. We'll save them. We'll get them answered, or you can communicate. But otherwise, again, thanks to all of you for sharing your information. I'm going to move on to the next set of presentations here. Let's get our current spotlights off. I don't know if you can get that last one off, Jacqueline, while I pull up the screen again.
Sure.
All right, we're going to go to Nicholas. And Nicholas, I need to stop the recording.
Okay. Thanks very much. Can you hear me, Susan?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, yeah, Allison couldn't make it, and she sent me some text to read in association with her slide.
Okay.
So be reading off my screen here. Allison says, first of all, thank you for inviting me to provide some insights into diet. I'll focus on the invertebrate diet of the rufous hummingbird nestlings because their success is key to population recovery. This work was performed by Alice Moran from Rocky Point Bird Observatory, John Moran, Royal Roads University, and Sean Foster from the University of Guelph. And it was published in 2019. Nesting female hummingbirds spend considerable time foraging for invertebrates. These provide the protein, fats, salts, and vitamins that are needed to build new bodies. Since nectar has low osmolality, salts are also necessary for nectivory. Salts lost in urination must be replaced via invertebrates in the diet. Insects and arachnids are known to comprise most of the hummingbird diet. To learn more, we looked at fecal DNA from nestlings raised in the Douglas fir forest of southern Vancouver Island, British Columbia. Hummingbird nestlings squirt colloidal fluid over the edge of the nest, decorating the surrounding vegetation in fecal pellets. And you can see one of these if you look at the red circle indicated by, or the circle indicated by the red arrow. Allison and her colleagues collected samples from 10 nests from which nestlings had fledged successfully. Sampling occurred after fledging, so there was no disturbance to the nestlings. They used PCR to amplify DNA from the pellets. Some pellets contained many sequences coming from a single type of prey item, while others found up to 15 families. We found 3 classes, 8 orders, 48 families, and 87 genera in just 10 nests, for a total of 30 pellets. Insects were the most frequent prey items. Almost 80% were true flies. In the main, these were predators and nectar feeders. Typical families were midges, daggerflies, and fungus gnats. Spiders were found in up to 25% of the samples. These were proportionally higher in protein and fat than insects. Since pellets were collected away from the nest, these sequences were likely to be true prey items and not contamination by spider silk lining the nest. So what did they learn? 1, rufous hummingbirds generally provision nestlings with soft-bodied prey. 2, much of their prey has a damp or aquatic life cycle stage. 3, they appear to use a wide range of fly species. What lessons does this bring to conservation? Wetlands and riparian areas are vital for the larval stages of many of the insects provisioned to rufous hummingbird nestlings. Number 2, invertebrates are also needed for nectivity, so their abundance is key to the success of birds following the wave of flowering on migration. 3, where wetland is lost or its productivity is compromised for some reason, such as pesticide use, that area will have reduced capacities to support stocks in migration or breeding. Number 4, we must protect wetland and riparian zone integrity and thus invertebrate resources along the migration route. And that's everything from Allison today. Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much, Christine, and thanks for pitching in for Allison. Our next speaker is Sabina. Sabina, are you out there?
Hi there. Yes, I am.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. So today I'm going to be speaking about climate change as a threat to hummingbirds and my master's thesis research on how microsite occupancy during foraging may be a mechanism for hummingbirds to cope with high ambient temperatures. So as we know, many bird species have already adjusted their ranges, behavior, and migration due to climate change, and we fully expect that to continue as the planet warms. And while some hummingbird species may respond to climate pressure by shifting their ranges northward or possibly upslope, hummingbird ranges are substantially limited by access to nectar. So hummingbirds and other nectarivores may effectively be tied to their current habitat unless their plant mutualists shift their own biogeographic ranges. One possible alternative, though, is some bird species respond to high temperatures using behavioral thermoregulation, and they'll forage preferentially in shady areas during hot periods. However, this hasn't yet been directly studied in hummingbirds. But interestingly, microclimates are only loosely tied to regional climate. We've found this with more granular climate data available in recent years. So behavioral thermoregulation through microsite selection may be a possible mechanism for hummingbirds to cope in situ with high temperatures without having to shift their range. In my project, I'm interested not only in foraging behavior and microsite occupancy, but also any pollination consequences for the plants the hummingbirds visit. Since I'm in the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area, I'm studying the Anna's hummingbird. And as we've heard from other presentations, Calyptiana has actually been doing pretty well recently. However, the long-term effects of significant warming are still really unknown, both for the birds and for the flowering plants they visit. So the hope is that any insights uncovered here could also help with our more threatened migratory hummingbird species. The key research questions I'm addressing are: how does high ambient temperature affect hummingbird microsite occupancy during foraging? Second, does this foraging behavior suggest Calyptiana or other hummingbird species could successfully use behavioral thermoregulation or microsite occupancy to cope with climate change? And third, how does this foraging behavior affect the pollination rates of hummingbird pollinated plants in sunny versus shady microsites within the same habitat? My project examines these questions using controlled outdoor experiments with feeders placed in identical sunny and shady microsites about 5 meters apart. You can see a picture of the setup at the top left there, with the sunny feeder with a frame around it to control for any effects of the frame, and a tent placed over the other feeder to create an artificial shady patch. Over 30 trials from June through November 2021, I recorded the number and duration of hummingbird visits to each microsite's feeder, and also used iButton temperature loggers to automatically collect temperature data at each microsite every 10 minutes. The feeders were outfitted with a pollen collecting shell supported on false stigmas to passively collect pollen from birds that visited each feeder. You can see a mock-up of that at the lower left of the slide. And I'll examine that pollen data microscopically to see if there's a difference in pollen deposition at each site based on temperature. This might suggest what the pollination rates would look like if hummingbirds forage preferentially in sun versus shade. And finally, at the bottom right, you can see a wildlife camera picture of actually 2 hummingbirds visiting the same feeder. This was on an unusually hot day, if I'm remembering correctly. They don't usually like to share the feeders. Analysis is ongoing, but my preliminary results show that the sunny microsite was visited more frequently than the shady microsite across all trials. But the within trial proportion of shady microsite occupancy was higher on days with higher ambient temperatures. And aggression appeared to be less of an issue as well, with birds chasing each other less frequently on very hot days. So hopefully when the analysis is complete, we'll have some useful conservation insights to share for these other species as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for sharing that information. We're going to take questions now for the speakers, and we'll keep it a little bit short so we have time for a short break and then the rest of the presentation so we can stay on time here. So any questions for our speakers? Nicholas, Christine will really test you.
I have a quick question, just a quick
Okay.
comment to Sabina, which is anecdotally, I don't think if anybody's published anything about this, but here in Canada, when it gets really cold in the winter with annas, you definitely see more sharing at feeders than you do when it's more temperate. So in extreme situations, seems like they will tolerate each other a lot more, perhaps.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And I've seen some work published on aggression and territoriality behavior in hummingbirds, but I believe it was a South American species. Yeah, so it does seem like thermal extremes, they have an effect on aggressive behavior, and they are more willing to share.
I was thinking about that in the context of just competition for resources. And when you see so many of them at feeders in tropical locations, and they're willing to share there, but well, I mean, they're constantly fighting, but there's a lot more at a single feeder. And I always thought, oh, it's just because there's a lot more hummingbirds around, but maybe there's other factors that, make them willing to share in a tropical area.
Yeah, I'd be very curious to learn more about how that works in the tropics.
Okay, it looks like we don't have any more questions. So I think what we'll do is we'll take a short break before we put up the next speakers. And Jacqueline, how long would we have to break? Are you keeping a track of time here?
Yeah, we'll adjust as we go. So let's still give people the 5 minutes, and we'll see you at 50 after the hour.
Okay, thank you. And thanks so much to all the presenters so far. It's incredible information for us to use. And if you want to, you can take this opportunity to chat or or do whatever you need to do while you take a break. All right. I will. So with that, I'm going to bring Laura Núñez Rosas. Laura, are you there?
Hola, sí, aquí estoy. Bueno,
Okay, and let me stop you real quick, Laura. Let's just make sure that everyone Laura will be presenting in Spanish. So everybody who needs an English translation, you can please go to the translation, make sure that's on. All right. Gracias, Laura.
Ok, bueno, Coro no pudo estar el día de hoy, entonces les voy a presentar lo que ella iba a hablarles sobre los colibríes y ante el cambio climático global. Bueno, sabemos que la migración se ha visto afectada por el cambio en la temperatura, principalmente los incrementos, principalmente en los tiempos de arribo, los tiempos de llegada a sus sitios de reproducción o a sus sitios de invierno. Y con esto tenemos entonces cambios asincrónicos en la migración y en los patrones de floración de las plantas de las cuales se alimentan. Esto tanto en sus sitios de invierno como en los reproductivos, pero también en los sitios de parada durante sus rutas migratorias. Lo que nosotros hemos estado haciendo en México para saber cómo va a afectar el cambio climático en la distribución de los colibríes residentes en México, hicimos una evaluación de cómo estos cambios en escenarios del 2040, 2060 y 2080 afectan a nuestras 49 especies residentes. Lo que nosotros encontramos fue que el 89% de los colibríes residentes, es decir, el 89% de esas 49 especies, van a perder gran área de su distribución y muchos también van a disminuir drásticamente la reproducción. El área de distribución, perdón, principalmente por el incremento en la temperatura y la disminución en la precipitación. Y solo el 11% de esas 49 especies van a mantener sus áreas de distribución o van a incrementar el área idónea de distribución en México. Ahora, esto solo lo hicimos con la distribución de los colibríes. ¿Qué pasa con las interacciones de las plantas y los colibríes? Es decir, de las plantas de las cuales se alimentan. Lo que ahora estamos haciendo es ver cómo van a cambiar estas áreas de distribución también de las plantas que se alimentan, estos 49 especies de colibríes, y sobre la par, estos cambios en áreas de distribución tanto de las plantas como de los colibríes para saber en qué áreas van a coincidir. Y con eso, saber qué áreas son prioritarias para la conservación. Nosotros, a partir de este análisis, detectamos áreas que se mantienen a través de estos escenarios de cambio climático, siendo prioritarias para su conservación, áreas de Oaxaca y de Guerrero. Es decir, son refugios que se mantienen a través de estos escenarios de cambio climático. Ahora, otra cosa que es muy importante que nosotros nos preguntemos, que hemos estado empezando a trabajar, es qué pasa con la elección del sitio donde construyen los nidos. Sabemos que los colibríes, al igual que muchos aves, no construyen el nido en sitios al azar, sino que lo construyen en sitios que cumplan con ciertas condiciones microclimáticas de temperatura, luz y humedad. Entonces, si nosotros compaginamos o asociamos estos cambios en la distribución asociados al cambio climático, los cambios en el área de distribución de las plantas de los que se alimentan, pero también los sitios que los colibríes eligen para reproducirse, nosotros vamos a tener esta certeza de cuáles son las áreas prioritarias para la conservación, donde estén los colibríes, donde tengan alimento, pero también tengan sitios donde reproducirse. Eso es todo de mi parte.
Muchas gracias. Thank you, Laura. And we're going to move on rapidly. And then again, we'll take questions after all of these last set of presenters. All right. Thank you. Jennifer Brown.
realized I needed to unmute myself. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for inviting us to this talk. I'm speaking on behalf of Lisa Tell with the Hummingbird Health and Conservation Program at UC Davis, California. And I work at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and I've been a longtime volunteer with the program. So yeah, I'll try to do my best. Yeah, next slide, please. Thank you. So yeah, we just wanted to provide an overview of the various types of studies done with the program over the years. The program started out conducting a literature review just to see what had already been done and what was out there. And then we started out by looking at trends with wildlife center admissions, seeing like what species were coming in and the reasons for them coming into wildlife centers for treatment. And also took a look at pathology of those birds too. And then the program evolved and they started looking at demographic studies, using molecular methods for species identification, a lot of banding. And then in recent years, they've been doing an RFID study. So RFID, I'm sure most of you know, but it's radio frequency identification. That's that, there's a photo of a tag up in the upper right-hand corner of the slide. It's very small. But yeah, it's really amazing information came out of that study. And then also conducting genetic landscape studies as well. The program has also looked at baseline health parameters, just trying to see what baseline looks like. And then so we can better look at future trends and changes over time. So I looked at white blood cell count reference intervals, looked at ocular data, tissue vitamin concentrations, and conducted immune function studies. And then some of the disease studies include parasitology, so looking at blood parasites and mites on the birds, and then also virology, which includes studies looking at West Nile virus and avian pox. Also looked at environmental contaminants, so looking for trace elements and also pesticide exposure. Another topic we're investigating is urbanization and the avian microbiome. So looking at the bacteria found in flower nectar and pollen versus the bacteria found in feeders. And also, yeah, looking at the different concentrations of bacteria and fungi as well in flowers versus feeders. And yeah, looking also at the microbiome in hummingbirds. So evaluating the bacteria that's found in the GI tract by collecting swabs and collecting fecal samples. And then more recently, a group just published a monograph recommending welfare-based techniques and approaches when working with hummingbirds. There's a lot of helpful information in there. And also there's a lot of permitting information in there if you're interested in learning more about differences in permitting between the U.S. Geological Survey and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So yeah, I wanted to make this quick because I know we're short on time, but if anyone has any questions, yeah, feel free to either ask me or you can contact Lisa Tell. I know she'll be joining us later. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thanks for your willingness to pitch in and give someone else's presentation. We really appreciate it. It's good to hear about all these factors that impact hummingbird health. We're going to move to Christine Bishop. Christine.
Thanks, Susan. So I want to speak to the variety of studies that have come out in recent years on the fact that hummingbirds are actually exposed to pesticides. And this is something that we in the ecotoxicological world and risk assessors and regulators had never accounted for until we started working with Alison Moran and Rocky Point Bird Observatory, and discussing threats to hummingbirds. And Alison suggested maybe we should look at pesticides in urine of these birds. They pee a lot one year, handling them for banding, and I was skeptical with my toxicological background, and lo and behold, we did find quite a lot of pesticides, of a large variety of pesticides in the urine and fecal samples. And there's more recent studies by Lisa Tell's group, Emily Graves, looking at not only the urine, but also looking at feather rinses and pesticides present in the liver. These are of hummingbirds that were found dead in California. And the focus that we've been doing has been on what we call systemic insecticides, and they're shown here in this picture, the imidacloprid, clethoanidin, and thiamethoxam, because they were just about to be regulated in Canada, or regulation is being reviewed. And this new compound, flupiridifurone, known as Savantoprime, which is replacing some of these compounds. And we're finding that at much higher concentrations than we are finding the original neonics. Just something to keep in mind for those that might do work in the future. Emily Graves and colleagues, as well as us, have found other types of pesticides. It's not just the neonics or the systemics. Malathion, carbaryl, piperonal-butoxide. These have all been found either in the urine or in the fecal samples or in the livers of these birds in recent years. I also just wanted to mention the work that was published on the occurrence of trace metals in feathers of hummingbirds. Now, the concentrations weren't very high, but just the reality that we actually can measure trace metals in the feathers of these birds. And also, not pesticides, but there was a really interesting study that looked at what birds are sensitive to dioxin-like compounds like PCBs, and ruby-throated hummingbird was the only one that was studied, but it came out in the group that can be the most sensitive to these compounds. And nobody's followed up to find out, how contaminated these birds might be in some of these Superfund sites. So I also just want to mention that the paper by Simon English and colleagues looked at captive ruby-throated hummingbirds and exposed them to environmentally relevant concentrations of imidacloprid, which is sort of the dominant neonic used throughout the world. And just in a 3-day exposure showed that respiration can be significantly suppressed in that species. And so we know that some of these concentrations can cause effects on these birds with high metabolisms. And some of the work that we're following up in is looking at wild hummingbirds in some of the areas that I study, which is blueberry fields in the Fraser Valley, when we know the birds are more contaminated than in urban areas, and trying to look at microbiome in their urine relative to pesticide exposure. And we have a complementary study going on bees in the same area. So I'll leave that to questions. Thanks.
Yes, so we'll just take questions at the end, Christine, but thanks so much for that presentation. And we will take it to Saraí. Saraí will be presenting in Spanish.
Hola, ¿me escuchan?
Sí, sí, perfecto.
Voy a hablar en español. Bueno, muchas gracias por su invitación. Algo que yo les quiero hablar es el efecto secundario que tienen los incendios forestales en los bosques templados del oeste de México. Nuestra área de estudio es la Reserva de la Biosfera Sierra de Manantlán, y bueno, nosotros hemos seguido cuál es la ecología del fuego y cómo ésta se relaciona también con patrones biológicos y ecológicos de la distribución de especies de colibríes. En este lugar encontramos 24 especies de colibríes, de las cuales Los 7 migratorios que tenemos de larga distancia, todas conviven aquí en un gradiente altitudinal. La siguiente. En esta área, nosotros tenemos los bosques templados han estado muy acostumbrados a los incendios. Entonces, tenemos un poco de preocupación por aquellas cuestiones de manejo que se dictaminan en nuestro país, que es la supresión de incendios y la acumulación de combustible. Una de las cosas que nosotros hemos estado trabajando en los últimos 30 años es ver cuál es la respuesta de abundancia y también cuál es la respuesta biológica, cómo los colibríes hacen, por ejemplo, todos los migratorios de larga distancia, su muda en estas zonas. Y una de las cosas que hemos aprendido es que principalmente para los colibríes migratorios de larga distancia, que son del género Celasphorus, sí se pueden ver impactados, ya sea positivamente o negativamente cuando hay un incendio forestal. Todo esto tiene que ver con la severidad, la intensidad y la frecuencia. En el caso de nuestros incendios que ocurren en esta zona, generalmente tienen un intervalo de retorno que va entre los 15 años más o menos 6 años. Y nosotros hemos visto que es muy importante ver esas respuestas de los colibríes, porque de esta manera pues nosotros queremos conservar y queremos mantener sus hábitats. ¿Qué es lo que pasa? Que cuando hay un incendio forestal, generalmente en estas zonas ocurre entre mayo y mediados de junio. Perdón, entre marzo y mediados de junio. Después de eso tenemos una temporada de lluvia que ayuda a la generación de muchas plantas que tienen síndrome ornitófilo. Y para esto nosotros hemos estudiado que a principio, por ejemplo, cuando se desata una sucesión, después de un año empezamos a tener plantas con las que serán beneficiadas, especialmente Celasphorus rufus. También Stélula calliope, perdón, Celasphorus calliope o calliope hummingbird y Allen's hummingbird. Sin embargo, el Celasphorus platycercus, que es el broadtail, él no va a responder de manera positiva en sus abundancias cuando tenemos esta perturbación. Esta especie se va a ver beneficiada después de que ocurren o recorre la etapa sucesional más temprana. Y nosotros encontramos que, por ejemplo, este grupo de los 3 Celasphorus que tenemos aquí, pues sí responden al alimento que están encontrando. Pero en el caso de Platycercus o broadtail, él no está respondiendo exclusivamente a la planta que está generándose ahí, sino responde a otros factores. Y uno de los factores que está respondiendo es el microclima. La temperatura es la que lo está moviendo en su distribución. Y es por eso que nosotros en los últimos 3 años hemos restaurado estas áreas dentro de la reserva, que son 774 hectáreas, porque pues queremos brindar hábitat para mantener esa población de rufus, de broadtail y de todos los Celasphorus. En el caso de los calliope, como también el Archilocus colubris, el Calipte coste y Archilocus alexandri, tenemos su distribución en zonas más tropicales. Y bueno, los incendios ahí no los hemos estudiado, por eso es que me atrevo a hablar de esto. Y ya nada más para concluir, decirles que a través de una sucesión nosotros hemos visto cómo cambian las poblaciones, cómo se mueve la densidad de poblaciones, y hemos visto, por ejemplo, con la suma de todos estos sitios, que Rufus sí ha disminuido. En años anteriores, llevamos 30 años estudiando todos estos patrones sucesionales, y en los últimos 30 años, sí hemos visto una disminución a una escala regional de Celasphorus rufus. no se ha encontrado, llega en tiempos diferentes en los últimos 5 años y es por eso que también estamos preocupados. Tenemos pues datos de distribución sexual, también tiene que ver. Es verdad, ellos, por ejemplo, Rufus se mueve a altitudes diferentes, hay distribuciones diferentes entre sexo y probablemente con edades. Y bueno, esto sería todo de mi parte.
Thank you, Sari. All right, we are nearing the end of our presentations, and our next one is once again Christine Bishop to discuss causes of mortality in birds.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All the data that's presented on this slide is actually for all birds, so not specific to hummingbirds. But in all of these studies, there are samples of hummingbirds that turn up that are affected by these anthropogenic stressors. And so what I'm presenting here is some work that I was involved in, and I want to point out this paper by Anna Calvert, 2013, published in Avian Conservation and Ecology, and there was this is an overview of the multiple causes of mortality other than natural death in birds in Canada, and then that issue has all sorts of papers on these specific types of things: cats, collisions, forestry, etc. And then there's been other studies, particularly in the US, on these individual anthropogenic stresses, wind factors, roads, buildings, and then an overview as well in the US. So I'm just going to talk to the Canadian estimates and say right off the top that if you look at the papers by Loss et al., the numbers you're seeing here are kind of another level up in terms of the states. More people, warmer climates. So when we say that we have about 100 million birds per year lost to cat predation, that number is an order of magnitude higher in the states from the quantification that's been done. So cats are the worst case scenario in Canada. But the other top factors involve collisions, buildings, roadkill, power lines, not necessarily just electrocutions, but just impacts to power lines. And as Jeff Geipel pointed out to a meeting that I was at recently with the WHP, is that there's a lot of electrocution of birds around prisons. And that's just a regular acceptance that that's going to occur, and people have to pick up these dead birds. I don't know how many hummingbirds are included in that, but definitely occurs, not just on hydro towers. And then the next step down from 10 million birds per year is around 1 million years per bird, or birds per year for forestry and separately for pesticides. So these are some of the top factors, and other things that were looked at that were less of a factor. For example, wind farms are a problem, but their impact is more on the 100,000 birds per year. So just wanted to raise this and have us keep this in mind in terms of the types of threats that may happen to hummingbirds, and the fact that there's probably a pretty big data gap about hummingbirds in terms of these general impacts, partly because they're small birds and less detectable. I'll leave it at that for now. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Christine. And that we have given you so much information today. I know it's a lot, but we do hope that it will inform your discussions as we move forward with looking at the conservation planning and threats to hummingbirds. Are there any questions for this last set of speakers? I see some comments in the chat box. So Anna Drake comments that pesticide legislation is challenging. I don't know how you translate whack-a-mole, so we'll use challenging. You learn enough to get one restricted, and then another new product comes in. So it's like one pesticide after another. And she's wondering what approach, Christine, you think is best for dealing with that problem. Is it about quantifying negative effects or managing exposure, or somehow reducing pesticide use more generally?
Yeah, it's a challenge. The regulatory process is similar in Canada, the States, European Union. I'm not familiar with the process in Mexico, for example, but it is done on a compound by compound basis. So, and that means whack-a-mole, it means you look at you get one compound and you understand it, maybe get it regulated, and something very similar. In this case, with these systemic insecticides, that's the case, is that they're regulating sort of the top three, but then there's more that are going to be systemic. And what I mean by systemic is these are compounds that are either applied to a seed as a dressing outside the seed, for example, corn seed, soybean, wheat. And then as the plant germinates, the pesticide goes straight up into the plant. Now, the upside of that is that it's not spread out all over the landscape when something is just sprayed from a plane or from an airblast sprayer. However, neonics are also, or these systemics are also applied with airblast sprayers in some situations, for example, where I work in blueberries or orchards in general. So back to the regulation aspect, I do think that managing exposure is probably the most effective. And that's what some of the regulations that they've brought in recently in Canada is to say, we recognize that these systemics have impacts on aquatic invertebrates, and new regulations have setbacks from water courses. The piece that's missing there is the monitoring to find out that that's actually being done on farms, and if the levels are actually decreasing in water courses after regulation has been brought in. So it's not just managing, but it's a follow-up. And this is the same in the States as well, is that there can be regulations, but there's not necessarily targeted funding for evaluating whether or not the changes are making a difference. There lots of farmers are working on reducing pesticide use more generally, but there is still lots of pesticides being used. So yeah, it's a
whack-a-mole. I think we said whack-a-mole. So yeah.
Saying that the work that was done on hummingbirds recently, those variety of papers did make a difference in terms of impacting regulators and making them realize that nectivorous species are very, potentially sensitive and exposed, and that includes bats as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Christine. That's really helpful. And I know we recognize that regulations may be different in different countries. And let's at this point, let's follow the chat response to that. I know that we're moving into overtime here, and I want to keep us on as much on our schedule as possible. So thanks to our current speakers. Let's continue to ask questions. And at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Armando and Jacqueline.
Great, thanks for that, Susan. We can,
yes, I'll pull them off while you guys get started.
Which is fine. This is the section where we are going to go from kind of presentations as we've had, and it sounds like there's a lot of knowledge and a lot of that expertise and context now, and we're going to move into more of a collaborative process. So we're going to split into 2 breakout groups. I'll stay here in the kind of home group, and then Armando will be in a separate breakout group. We will be looking at the situation model and actually have you guys giving us feedback, making edits, and then just to give you a little highlight of next steps. tonight before the session tomorrow, we'll start to incorporate that feedback we get in the breakout groups and bring any feedback or edits that you all make that needs to be discussed with the larger group. We'll have time for that tomorrow. So this is just one and our first opportunity to look at the situation model more interactively.
Thank you. And Jacqueline, I think this is the time when we're going to have everyone who wants to discuss the breeding range of hummingbirds will stay here. So you won't go into a breakout room. Everybody who would like to discuss the non-breeding or non-reproductive areas for migratory hummingbirds will move into the breakout room. Okay, so I'm going to push the open all rooms, and actually it says, let me.
Before you do that,
yeah.
Before you do that, Susan, Jacqueline, can you share the link to the?
Yeah, thanks,
to
Armando.
the Google slides. Yeah.
Hang on, I'm going to recreate the room because for some reason it wants me to assign everybody, and I definitely don't want to do that.
Yeah, hopefully you have an option where it says something like participants may choose.
Yes. It did
So
say
I
that
did
when I
put in the chat, we're going to be working in Google Slides. So another reminder from what Armando said early on, this is going to be quite interactive. So if you're not on a laptop or a computer right now and you're calling by phone or on a tablet, we still want you to participate, but we'll ask that you either speak verbally or put it in the chat when we're in those breakout groups, just so we can have this simultaneous collaboration mode for Google Slides.
Okay, so it says that the breakout room has been created and broadcast. Did you see that?
Wait, let's take a look.
So I'll take
Okay.
the non-breeding group to room 1.
Yeah,
And
so
you will
everyone,
remain in, okay,
right.
Good.
Right, everyone who wants to discuss non-breeding, please go to room 1. Everyone who wants to stay here for breeding range, just stay where you are.
Great.
All right,
It looks
good.
like people are starting to join. If you're having any trouble, feel free to put your name in the chat and we will move you into that group.
Great.
We'll give another, great, we can move you, Veronica. Thanks for that. Yep, so if you're not able to move yourself, just put it in the chat, or once we have everyone in our room, if you don't want to be there, just let us know. Okay, Jorge, we can move you over. Great, you should be moved.
I don't know why can't they move?
It's a newer feature in Zoom. So if you're not seeing it, you may just need to scroll down. You click on breakout groups, you scroll down, and you'll see something that says room 1 with a little blue button to click join. But it's not tricky for us to move you, so just keep putting it in the chat. Looks like there's a good handful of people over there.
Mm-hmm.
18 people over there. So I think we can get started, Susan. And
Yes.
then, like I said, just anyone, if you feel like you're not, this is not the room you'd like to be in, it's a click of a button for us so we can move you over. I'm going to put one more time in the chat here, the link to where we are. It looks like we have about 20 people in there right now. So hopefully those numbers can increase even more. I'm also going to be sharing my screen. I won't be in presentation mode so that you all can see the actual edits that we're making. But what we're going to do, and we are the breeding season, correct, Susan?
Yes, we are.
Great. So we're on slide 7, 8, and 9. I have the instructions in here on slide 5, but I'm happy to just say them out loud. And there is a situation model in English and in Spanish. So on slide 8, you can see that the situation model is in English, and slide 9, it's in Spanish. Feel free to comment in English or Spanish. I'm going to give everyone just a few minutes to look over the situation model, and our task for the next 30 minutes or so is to start providing feedback and having a discussion about what needs to be added, if there's anything that's misrepresented, and then try and call out some of the specifics regarding breeding season that maybe aren't encompassed in the situation model or that should be highlighted. So again, you should be able to see my screen. You can type in the chat, you can speak up verbally, or hopefully we have a lot of you actually working in the slide. And to provide feedback, because this will be ongoing throughout the workshop, you can just drag one of these numbers. Maybe you don't want it to say loss of floral resources. Maybe you want it to say change to loss of floral and grassland resources, something like that. Okay, that's just a very random example. Looks like there's someone being admitted. They can be large scale comments, right? And feel free to just float them anywhere. Or they can be down to, like I said, wording of an individual box where the arrow is pointing. So get as detailed or as high level as you'd like. If this is tricky for you to see or you're on a small screen, just note in Google Slides, there is a zoom feature here. Okay, so drag a number over and type down here in the notes pane, submit in the chat, or speak up verbally. Does anyone have questions? Okay. I know this is still a fairly large group, but I want everyone to feel like we can be chatting. So work as quietly and independently as you'd like. Ooh, it looks like we just had our model deleted.
Oh no.
Someone can press backspace real quick if someone can undo that. Otherwise, I will create another one real quick, but I'm not sure how that happened. Just sorry if you were already typing something in there, but on slide 8 here, we'll just use that. Sorry about the folks who already had comments in there.
Jacqueline, for a moment, I'm going to go to room 1 to make sure they can get the translation started.
Great. Thanks, Susan, for your help.
Thanks. Armando, is translation working?
I'm working with Claudia on doing the translations, but there is no interpreter channel here. I think I don't know if it's possible in the breakout rooms.
Can we do this session just in Spanish? Are there that many English speakers in here, or how many are there?
Well, I was telling Armando that we can do consecutive, which is, well, it's not, it doesn't flow as much,
Right.
because he has to speak in chunks and then I'll translate. So if it's just for the breakout room, then it's fine. And when we go back to the main room, then we can do interpreting there.
Yeah, I don't see any option to add
Because
translation.
I'm not sure if that's possible either.
I don't think it
Yeah.
is. I'm not seeing it. So let's do that if that's okay. So you can move
That's
forward.
perfect.
Okay.
Okay, no problem.
¿De cuál fecha? ¿De cuál mes? ¿La vez que fue con Jonathan? Sí. Hay una cantidad de fotos de niños. ¿Sabes de qué niños son? Hay unos niños que están como en el suelo, en el piso. Hay unos, sí, hay un coñazo. Sí, sí. Todo mi casa. De acuerdo. Ahí va. Están las unos poquitos, como otros. Pero vi más. El colibrí también, el fuscat, el talurán. Pero puede encontrar la foto.
Armando, qué pena, tengo una pregunta. Em,
Dale, Ana.
la finalidad o sea, este diagrama se va a utilizar para desarrollar estrategias para la conservación. Entonces,
Exacto.
lo que quieren es que hagamos comentarios em, en las cajas, tanto en las cajas amarillas como rojas, por si falta algo o ayudar a identificar los factores detrás de esas amenazas. Eso es lo
Por un lado, sí. O sea, tanto, ¿qué es lo que falta? La pregunta guía es, ¿algo está mal? ¿Algo no, o sea, los vuelve incómodos a ustedes cuando ven este modelo? ¿O falta algo? ¿No? Algo no está bien ahí planteado. Pueden ser relaciones, pueden ser también las flechas o pueden ser los factores. También revisar las amenazas, ¿no? Justo Jorge ha escrito que las especies invasoras que nosotros habíamos puesto ahí no siempre son amenazas porque pueden ser jugar a favor, ¿no? Tipo los feeders, ¿no? Puede ser a favor de los colibríes. Entonces, eso hay que tomarlo en cuenta. Tenemos que decirlo mejor. Gracias.
Okay, so translation is going to be consecutive. There is no simultaneous translation, and I'm going to translate the question. The question was, so the goal of this diagram is to develop conservation strategies. So what you want us is to make comments or add information to the yellow and red boxes or to help identify factors. And the answer by Armando was, well, the main question or that you should be asking yourselves is what's missing from the model, or is there something wrong with the model, something that pops out or that doesn't feel right? And if there is something missing, you can add information, or you can also make comments or change the relationships between the factors and the threats. For example, the arrows might be wrong. And also, Jorge just mentioned, for example, with the threats, we had added invasive species to the model, but he made a comment that not all invasive species are considered a threat. Some invasive species can be in benefit or in favor of the hummingbirds, like the feeders help thrive the hummingbirds instead of affecting them.
No sé quién puso la flecha de relación entre los efectos del cambio climático y la pérdida de insectos, pero le he puesto roja simplemente para que salte a la vista. ¿De
Yo la
acuerdo?
puse, Jorge Shonduve. Ahorita iba a poner una
Ya,
nota ahí.
listo. Ah, perfecto, perfecto. La puse de rojo para que se vea bien, nada más.
Armando, I can't see in the part where I can move the numbers, I can't read the text, but where I see demand for water, it should be a habitat degradation thing and not just a habitat loss contributor.
Y bueno,
Ah,
no alcanzo a ver muy bien los números, pero en el texto de donde dice pérdida de agua, eso también puede ser degradación de hábitat y no nada más destrucción de hábitat, ¿verdad?
where exactly are you? Yeah,
There's a
that's a good
yellow.
one. Yeah,
Yeah, there's a yellow that says increased demand for water.
right,
And I see the
right.
arrow only going into habitat loss, but I think the arrow should also go into habitat degradation.
Bueno, estoy
Uh,
hablando del amarillo que dice aumento de demanda de agua, que tiene una flecha que solo está relacionada con la pérdida de hábitat, pero creo que también se puede relacionar con la degradación de hábitat, ¿no?
It's almost upper left-hand corner.
Separate left. Yeah, you mean the increased global demand for water, but it
Yes.
feeds into the increased demand for locally grown food and then into habitat destruction. You mean it should also go into habitat degradation?
Right. Uh-huh.
Okay, good, good, got it.
Ok,
I'll put it in a line. Sí,
entonces
perdón.
lo que quieres decir es que el aumento global de demanda de agua debería estar relacionado también con degradación del hábitat y no nada más con destrucción. Sí.
Done.
And just FYI, Armando had mentioned before that he's going to highlight the arrow that connects climate change to insects. Just so you know.
Great.
Yeah, and Greg, I did it on slide 11, just in case you're looking for it and you don't find it on slide 12. It's on slide 11.
I trust you.
Y Greg está en la diapositiva 11, por si lo buscas en la 12 no está ahí, la agregué en la diapositiva 11.
Hola, Claudia.
Ujú.
Bueno, solamente quería decir que puse 4 flechas de influencia cultural. En Estados Unidos vemos que principalmente las especies que puse, Arquilopsis alexandri, se movió creo, Caliope, Calipteana y Coste y Celasphorus platycercus son de los que son usados más en el oeste de Estados Unidos por la influencia cultural o mercado negro internacional. Entonces, si es mercado negro, quizás la flecha tendría que bajar, ¿verdad? Aquí.
So there are 4 arrows that I added for cultural influence. For example, I added a couple of species of hummingbirds like the Calliope and like the Celasphorus platycercus, because those species are impacted by cultural influence because they are used or sold in the black market. So if I want to put the black market, then should I put the arrow where it is?
Sí, Saraí, creo que sí, está bien como los has puesto, solamente le he cambiado de nuevo el color, pero nada, está bien. Es buena la información, te agradezco.
Yes, it's fine, Sarai. The information is really good. I just highlighted the arrows in a different color, but where you put them, it's fine.
Yeah, just solo Saraí para saber, o sea, la demanda del mercado internacional, del mercado negro internacional, es una caja amarilla que va a la Casa para el Comercio Ilícito de Especies. Y de esa caja rosada de la Casa para el Comercio Ilícito de Especies que está dentro de pérdida directa de los individuos, es que hay una flecha que va a todos los colibríes. No sé si eso contesta tu preocupación. O sea, es, la demanda genera la caza que afecta a los individuos de esas especies.
Sí, es, bueno, bueno, adelante, Claudia.
Ay, gracias. So in the yellow box, it has the impact of the international black market, which goes directed to hunting or to illegal commerce, which is a pink box. And then this pink box relates to the direct loss of individuals. And then there is an arrow that points to all hummingbird species. So basically the route would be that the global demand of the black market affects hunting, which directly affects individuals, right? Okay.
Sí, algo que quizás, bueno, no sé si podemos llegar a ese nivel y claro, Armando, tú dijiste que no fuéramos también como saturar esto, es que probablemente haya amenazas que están más influenciadas para ciertas especies. Yo he visto en el mercado negro que, por ejemplo, estas son 4 especies que buscan o que están capturadas y en el caso de México son otras. Son residentes y depende, creo que mucho de cómo tienen el plumaje. Entonces, no sé a qué nivel podamos llegar, pero a lo mejor puede ser a nivel poblacional o incluimos todos, no sé, busquemos más adelante cómo queda.
So something that I don't know if we can get to that level of detail because you did mention that we didn't want to make this model very overwhelming. But I did identify that there are a couple of threats that are more specific to specific species because the 4 species that I mentioned that have demand in the international black market are in the US. But for example, in Mexico, there are other species affected by this threat, but they're usually resident species. And I think that this demand depends mostly on the plumage. And I don't know if it's more convenient to talk about threats that are specific to the species that, just the species that we have on the list, or is it better to include all the species as being affected by this factor? But I don't know, you're the one that's going to tell us.
So yeah, I think it's hard to subdivide among the species and we understand that in Mexico especially, there's so many resident species affected by all these same things. So I think that's worth mentioning in the bike rack, but I think it's hard to subdivide or add resident species to the model itself.
Yo creo que va a resultar bastante difícil si queremos subdividir por especies, especialmente considerando que en México hay tantas especies residentes que son afectadas por las mismas amenazas o los mismos factores. Entonces, no sé, yo creo que tal vez agregar una subdivisión por especie sería más difícil en el modelo.
I had a
Go ahead.
couple of thoughts about some of these contributing factors. Near the bottom, there's proximity of feeders to homes. And I think that the key contributing factor is actually increase in the number of hummingbird feeders. And that increases building collisions and increases disease transmission. So I suggest a change in the wording there.
Yo tengo, bueno, he identificado diferentes factores. Por ejemplo, uno incluido casi hasta abajo en el modelo es la proximidad de los alimentadores a las casas, pero yo creo que más bien tendríamos que considerar el número de alimentadores, porque en realidad el número de alimentadores que haya es el que va a afectar el número de colisiones y enfermedades.
And then a little bit lower than that, it says in-house night lighting. And I would change that to night lighting, both outdoors and indoors.
Y también hasta abajo dice iluminación nocturna en las casas, pero yo también cambiaría el concepto y agregaría luz nocturna tanto dentro de las casas como al aire libre.
That's the theme for World Migratory Bird Day this year. So I think Sue Bonfield will be happier if we change that wording just a little bit to be more consistent with the theme for World Migratory Bird Day.
Y además, y además es el tema del Día Mundial de las Aves Migratorias, entonces yo creo que sería más consistente si cambiamos el concepto, el nombre del concepto para que tenga más consistencia para el Día Mundial de las Aves Migratorias.
Which concept are you meaning, Greg? The one about the
The
night
night
lights?
lighting.
Night
So
lighting. Okay.
Lights out at night is the theme for World Migratory Bird Day.
Yeah.
And that's both indoors and outdoors.
Sí, cuando hablo de la luz nocturna, de luz de noche, significa la iluminación artificial y el tema del Día Mundial de las Aves Migratorias es mantener las luces apagadas durante la noche para no afectar el trayecto de las aves.
And then on the previous comment, it was really interesting, the presentation that the increase in bird feeders may be connected to the growth in population of Anna's hummingbird and then the modification of their structures. So I thought that was very interesting.
Y también se me hizo muy interesante en la presentación sobre los alimentadores, cómo el aumento del número de alimentadores modifica la estructura de algunas especies, pero también aumenta o les ayuda a la conservación.
Thank you, Greg. I put them on slide 12 as 6 and 7, comment 6 and 7.
Okay, thank you. I wish I could do it myself, so thank you for your help, Armando.
Oh, no
Gracias.
problem at all.
Gracias por tu ayuda, Armando. Y los cambios están en la diapositiva 12, comentarios 6 y 7.
También quisiera hacer una pregunta a Jorge Chandúbal, que comenta sobre las especies invasoras de plantas pueden favorecer de forma importante a los colibríes. Y cuando estamos hablando de estas especies invasoras, Jorge, ¿tú te refieres de casualidad a especies que están en jardines? Que tienen personas
No estoy pensando en... Ay, perdón, creo que hay traducción, ¿verdad? Me salto, me espero.
Gracias. So Jorge is asking if only invasive plant species are in a benefit for hummingbirds, and Miguel is asking if only garden species.
No, Miguel, me refiero precisamente, no solo estoy pensando en especies exóticas en jardines, sino pensando en especies exóticas que ya están escapadas, ¿no? Que están realmente funcionando como invasoras en el campo. Por ejemplo, Leonotis, hay varias especies en el género Leonotis que son muy, muy abundantes en campos agrícolas, cerca de carreteras, y que producen cantidades impresionantes de néctar y son muy utilizados por colibríes migratorios.
So I'm not talking about exotic species in gardens. I'm talking about exotic species that are already work as an invasive species. For example, there are different species of the Leonotis genus that we can easily find in agricultural fields or by highways. And these species have a huge or a great amount of nectar, which is a great resource for migratory hummingbirds.
Solo para que sepan, tenemos unos 7 minutos más antes de regresar, pero es importante que alguien de nosotros reporte qué es lo que hemos visto y lo que está en la diapositiva 11 y 12. No tienen que explicar todo, pero sí mostrar dónde están los comentarios, ¿no? Comentarios a nivel de factores contribuyentes, de amenazas y de los objetos, las especies de conservación.
So we have a couple of minutes before we have to go back to the main room. And just so you know, somebody needs to report back what we commented here on the model. And you don't need to explain anything. You just need to show the comments that we added for the factors, the threats, and the conservation species that we have in the model.
Así que, ¿quién es voluntario?
So who volunteers?
Yo quiero comentar algo en relación a esto, que también estaba yo pensando si era una amenaza, pero dentro de los estudios de las colisiones, sí tenemos al grupo de los colibríes que colisionan bastante. y pudiera ser pues también una amenaza, especialmente cuando estos espejos, bueno, el vidrio es muy, refleja jardines. Entonces, con la velocidad que llevan en vuelo y no ven que es una ventana, sí llega a haber mortandades importantes. Entonces, bueno, colisiones por ventanas cerca de jardines es algo muy amenazante.
So I don't know if, well, I just wanted to say this comment because I don't know if this could be considered as a threat. For example, there are collision studies out there that already identify, we have them that already identify the groups of hummingbirds that tend to collide to buildings or windows the most. And it is especially a threat when we have high reflecting glass windows that reflect gardens or other plants, and the speed in which the hummingbirds are traveling becomes really dangerous, and it does affect the mortality rates, I think. So I don't know if we should add the threat of highly reflective windows to gardens.
Yeah.
Just, solo para que Saraí, solo para que sepas, está puesto como colisiones contra edificios. No hicimos específicamente contra ventanas, pero un factor que contribuye a esa amenaza es la falta de normas que regulan el uso, no es de papel, es de vidrios, ¿no? De estas ventanas, digamos, ¿no? Que tienen que no reflejar, por ejemplo. Pero lo estoy poniendo como un comentario.
So we do have the category of collisions, but it's collisions to buildings. We don't have it in detail for windows, for example, but for example, a factor that does affect this threat is the lack of regulation in glass materials for windows, meaning the use of non-reflectant glass for windows. So that is a comment that I'm going to add.
That when we say buildings, we actually mean windows.
Okay.
Y bueno, creo, Armando, que cuando decimos edificios, en realidad sí nos referimos a las ventanas.
So I've been thinking about what Sarah E. said sooner and earlier. And in the non-breeding season, it's so important that the target for our planning is the migratory species, but so many of these things are affecting the resident species. And I don't know if there's any way to reflect that in this model, that everything we're talking about here is really affecting a much wider variety of hummingbird species, especially in the non-breeding season.
Estuve pensando en lo que Saraí mencionó anteriormente respecto pues a las afectaciones, especialmente en la época de no reproducción, porque no nada más, bueno, todos estos factores definitivamente afectan a las poblaciones que estamos considerando, pero que son las especies migratorias, pero también son afectaciones para las especies residentes. Entonces, estos impactos en realidad afectan a un rango mucho más grande de especies del que tenemos en el modelo, y no sé si haya alguna manera de que esto se pueda reflejar en el modelo.
I'm thinking. Estoy pensando. The thing, Greg, is that we're working on these species, but you're right. A lot of the threats, if we were to be able to reduce them, would have benefits for other hummingbird species and other bird species. The glass pane, for example, the collisions, if there's some level of regulation, that would also help apodiformes. What's that? Vencejos, swallows. That would also help swallows and swifts. Sorry,
Yeah.
swifts and yeah. So yeah, I agree with you. It's something that could have some benefits, but I'm not sure if it's how we could put that.
Sí, tienes razón. Ah, sí.
Perdón.
No, tienes razón, Greg. La cosa es que las especies que están en el modelo son las especies con las que estamos trabajando, pero tienes razón en que si disminuimos estas amenazas, pues entonces el beneficio será para un rango más amplio, no nada más de colibríes, sino de otras especies también, porque por ejemplo, si logramos implementar regulaciones para las ventanas de los edificios, disminuirían las colisiones no solo de colibríes.
God, that was violent and aggressive. Sorry, Claudia.
I tried to give you 60-second warning. It never seems to help.
It never seems to help. That's true. But what I can say is that we did not get to the part where we chose a volunteer, or a volunteer chose him herself for this part. So I'm probably gonna do a dedocracia, finger pointing and saying you do it. Anyway, thank you guys. I hope the discussions in each one of the breaking groups was interesting and helped us all understand better what the situation model is trying to show. I don't know if Jacqueline, in your group, did you have a volunteer to kind of show us the highlights of the conversation?
We did have someone who agreed to be volunteered, which was very, very nice. And I told her it would be quite brief, more just to highlight a few of the main points we had. So Jamie, if you don't mind representing our group still, and I'm happy to share my screen if
Please.
that's helpful.
Please, could you help? Could you share? That would be great. Thank you. Jamie, you have some time to.
We had some really great input. Just pulling up the notes. For example, so Hillary White pointed out that we should add an arrow from use of pesticides to loss of floral resources, and an arrow from overgrazing to loss of habitat. Erin pointed out that we should add an additional arrow between insects and invasive species. Yes, there was a comment that we needed to add phenology mismatch under climate change effects. A couple comments to that effect.
You can see there were lots of comments. Lots of individual comments.
We're on slide, just so everybody knows, we're on slide 8. So if you can, on your computer, you can also check these the comments, the different comments that Jamie is pointing out, and maybe you find something worth commenting.
Yeah, that's a great point, Armando. I was just letting my team know at the end that people can respond to the comments that are in here. So feel free to just, if you feel comfortable typing your name after one of these comments, or even if you just want to write like agree, or actually, you know, I don't think we should add that. All of that's really helpful, so that after today's session, we can start to incorporate feedback that seems like it's very easy to incorporate, and then bring more feedback to the group tomorrow. So Anna pointed out that in terms of wildfire
having a negative impact on Rufous hummingbird during migration. They did not find support for this in their survival time series.
Great. Armando, do you want to leave it at that? I know we're a little tight on time. I think the group definitely mentioned that the biophysical factors could be built out a bit more, and I'll just put in a plug. We have a lot of contributing factors, but there's a lot of isolated orange boxes, like a single orange box leading to some of these direct threats. And it would be really great to see that story a little bit more. So we want this model to tell a story, right? When you're kind of reading it left to right, you're seeing like, okay, this is what's contributing to the threats, and these threats have this impact kind of on the environment, and that's why they're affecting our targets. There was some good climate change stories brought up as well as opportunities. I think that's something we want to make sure we add, is that there are a few opportunities that we should represent in this model. So thank you again, Jamie. Sorry to put you on the spot. And I'm happy to keep my screen open, Armando, if we want to jump to your group.
Yeah. In our group, who wants to volunteer and say something? We used both slides, just so you know. So it's slide 11 and 12. There's more comments on 12 than 11 because we were kind of showing that, but I don't know. Saraí, te pongo en el spot.
Híjole, bueno, hicimos algunos comentarios en relación a, pues, cuáles eran las amenazas, si teníamos que cambiar algunas amenazas, o si teníamos que también que hacer esto muy particularmente a nivel de las especies. Y bueno, vamos a leer rápido. Dijo que hay especies invasoras de plantas que pueden favorecer a los colibríes, entonces no siempre son realmente una amenaza. Otro de sus comentarios es que es importante considerar que tenemos de esas 7 especies 2 grupos que tienen poblaciones residentes, ¿verdad? Como broadtail, y el otro es olvidé su nombre en inglés, pero es Archilochus alexandri. Y bueno, hay que considerar eso para quienes están en el grupo de reproducción. En el caso de Ana González, sabemos la magnitud del efecto de las amenazas es una pregunta, bajo pérdida directa de los individuos. Es como, bueno, si o alguien quiera responder a esta pregunta, si realmente vemos que cada una de las amenazas que nosotros consideramos hay pérdidas directas sobre estos individuos. Es algo que hay que continuar, yo creo, preguntando, o si alguien quiere responder, Sherry, o alguien que quiera participar. También otra de las amenazas que tenemos es en relación al desarrollo minero en el oeste de México, especialmente en el eje transvolcánico. Ahí tenemos la Sierra de Tapalpa, que pues es donde se está extrayendo el piso, el suelo, para hacer plantaciones de aguacate y también de los berries. Entonces, ahí es algo que tenemos que poner mucha atención, sobre todo considerando que tenemos el eje neovolcánico se concentra, yo considero esto, las poblaciones más grandes de todo lo que emigra de las 7 especies de colibríes, ¿no? Entonces, es algo que tenemos que poner mucha atención. Jorge también habla de los efectos de cambio climático que tienen efectos directos sobre las poblaciones de insectos. Bueno, en el caso de Greg, estaba también hablando sobre los cambios en el uso de los bebederos. La disposición espacial creo que era algo que pues a lo mejor se tendría que considerar, o igual el uso de estos bebederos. Y bueno, Armando, ya no alcanzo a ver más abajo los comentarios. No sé si pudiera subir un poco.
Jacqueline, can you go down, scroll down on eso es. Thanks.
Otra de las cosas que también, bueno, estábamos comentando es sobre las luces en la noche de las casas, y tendremos que hacer algunos cambios, y bueno, que esto también hacía referencia de poner atención o incorporar lo del Día Mundial de las Aves Migratorias como un tema que, bueno, es importante conocerlo porque no sabemos de qué manera pues estén afectando a todas estas especies que migran, ¿verdad? Pero probablemente es algo también negativo. Y una de las cosas que hemos notado aquí en el oeste de México es también en relación al tipo de ventanas que estamos utilizando. Nosotros pensamos que el avanzar a la modernización es como tener todas estas ventanas que se reflejan, y hemos notado que para los colibríes, cuando están estas ventanas enfrente de los jardines, pues sí provocan colisiones y se impactan. El pico sí se llega a enchocar y pues las aves mueren, especialmente los colibríes. En el caso Verónica, también, que es la maestra de la Universidad de Guadalajara, dice que tal vez conviene incluir el mercado nacional en México, ¿verdad? Como una cuestión donde para ella dice que le ha tocado ver el mercado bajista llenas de colibríes en época migratoria. Entonces, bueno, eso no lo entendí muy bien, Vero, si puedes intervenir, ¿a qué se refiere? ¿Estará ahí por ahí, Vero? Verónica Rosas. Bueno, quizás no está conectada ahorita. Jorge, bueno, perdón, en el caso de Gabriel, él considera que es importante agregar el cambio en la fenología de las plantas de las que se alimentan los colibríes dentro de sus rutas migratorias. Ahí no sé, Gabriel, si tú quieres mencionar algo más específico. ¿También estás por ahí?
Sí, sí, aquí
Saraí,
estoy.
sí,
Sí, adelante.
no quiero cortarlos, pero creo que tenemos
Poquito tiempo.
poquito tiempo, pero creo que está claro, ¿no? O sea, lo que dice Gabriel ahí en cuanto, sí.
Pues, y bueno, Jorge, por último, añade cambios que tal vez valga la pena añadir cambios en la fenología como un factor biofísico, ya que no es lo mismo que pérdida de recursos naturales, y de este modo podemos relacionar cambios climáticos. Y creo que el último que yo hacía es el que habla sobre las brechas cortafuego. Estas brechas, hice una evaluación, y cuando están en zonas que no son pavimentadas, pues no vemos que lo afecte de manera negativa a los colibríes cuando están aquí en México. Entonces era nada más como un comentario general.
Gracias, Saraí. Gracias por la presentación. Voy a cambiar nuevamente a inglés. So Jacqueline and I will take all those comments that you have been so gracious to give us on slides 8, 9, 11, and 12. And we're going to adapt or adjust the situation model to incorporate those comments. And we can show it to you tomorrow. So right now we're going to jump into the next session. But first of all, do you guys need a break? Let's say a 2-3 minute break at the most. Would that be good?
Yes.
That would be
Yes,
great. Okay.
I'll
So
stand
we
up
have
and sit down.
Yeah, 3-minute break. It's 10 past. Let's be here at 13 past. Is that good?
Yes.
Okay. See you.
Jacqueline, are you still on? Or are you breaking?
I'm here.
Okay, do you need me to go on and make the new rooms?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, I'm gonna delete room 1 and start over again.
Okay.
Not sure what that was.
We're still recording, which is fine with me, but just
pause the recording here.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for the reminder. Actually, where did it go?
If you let us, great, you're on it. Okay. So you can see my screen, and I'll try and keep this pretty brief, but we talked about this earlier, but once we have a general sense of what's going on in the landscape, what is our current context, then we can start thinking about these interventions, or you'll often hear them called strategies or strategic approaches, right? What are you all going to do in order to have healthier Western migratory hummingbird populations? So we're moving into kind of this plan piece, right, where we're looking at developing those strategies, and we'll use this to move into later on this week, developing those theories of change. So how do we get from strategy to our ultimate goals? You can see here, we'll just touch on what a strategy is, but then also how to prioritize those strategies, which is what we'll spend a good chunk of tomorrow's session on. So a strategy is a set of activities. So it's not just one thing you're doing, but kind of an umbrella for a set of activities that have a common focus and work together to either reduce a threat, right, capitalize on an opportunity, or restore the natural systems. We'll also add in, hopefully, objectives and goals so that you can track whether or not those strategies are working and that progress. You can see here, we'll often represent those with these yellow hexagons, and think about a good strategy is linked. So it addresses one or more critical factors. Those are the different boxes in that situation model. It's focused. So what is a specific course of action that you're planning to take, right? We don't want it to just say research or just say, education. We want to think about the actual action. Feasible. So is this something that you all can actually focus on? Appropriate. So within different norms or the site that you're working, how well does this fit? And as I briefly mentioned before, you think of your strategies as affecting your situation model in 3 different ways. You can think of target restoration, right? So maybe that's actual species management, relocations, translocations. You can think of behavior change. Maybe you have increases in awareness, outreach, and communications, or these other enabling conditions. So often you'll see this represented by policies or partnerships that are being developed. So this is just kind of some examples to show you as we jump into brainstorming them ourselves. So first, some of the first things you do, and we'll be sending you off into really small groups, is you might think about a prioritized threat, so those pink boxes, or a target to focus on. Think about the key intervention points to reduce this threat. So where can you make an impact? Then brainstorm the potential strategies, and we'll have some places that you can type directly into those slides again. We'll move tomorrow more into that prioritization piece. So how do we narrow down the strategies and what it's important for you to kind of use your resources for before you can select your final strategies. We'll also kind of have what makes a good strategy and make sure you're reapplying those criteria back into the strategy to make sure it's as effective as possible. So if we have an example here, maybe we're focused on salmon instead of hummingbirds, and we have a few of our threats: irrigated agriculture, water control structures, and some of those contributing factors. You may go along and say, okay, where can I make an impact, and start to identify some of those key intervention points, right, in order to reduce the threat, maybe even some of those opportunities like we talked about earlier. Then you can start brainstorming potential strategies. This is what we're going to do today, and we want you to keep your minds very open on day one. We'll bring in some of those other criteria to make sure that they're actually strategies that could work. But for right now, we want you to think outside of the box. Think about what's already been done, but also what hasn't been done, right? What people haven't used as good interventions. You might have some for the contributing factors or strategies that affect the threat directly, and those opportunities. We'll go through, and like I said, not until tomorrow, start thinking about prioritizing these strategies. Sometimes we'll use factors like potential impact or feasibility. And we've also worked a little bit with the Western Hummingbird Partnership to look at other criteria that might be important to them. So the added value, the unique contribution, right? The associated risk with implementing a strategy, and that opportunity for implementation. So whether or not this is likely to be successful. Again, once you rate those, you jump back into the selection and making sure that you can apply those criteria back on. We often do some of these ratings to think about if it's going to be effective or less effective or not effective at all. You can see some of those represented with the different colors on there. And if that's needed to prioritize, it can help you eliminate strategies that are less likely to be successful. Sometimes that's just because of complexity. Sometimes that's just because of feasibility. So that's something that we'll work through as a group. Once you select your final strategies, again, you can think about, will it fill a gap that someone else isn't already working on? What are those unintended consequences? So going back to the risk, right? And thinking also about climate considerations, the effect on people and communities. We already talked about the criteria, but this is something you just want to make sure works and is appropriate with that situation model. I think last but not least, we'll work on those theories of change. So how to get from strategy to goal. And you might have things that seemed realistic in the next few days, but as we develop the theories of change, need to be revisited. So this is just another reminder in the planning process that this is iterative. And if we come up with something in the next few days that then becomes unrealistic, we can continue to make those changes, right? I'll link over here, and this quick, I know it's very quick, introduction to strategy is linked on the website, which on the workshop website, which we'll talk a little bit more about. But there are some standardized actions that may be helpful for your group. And Armando, we could probably put that in the chat too before we send people into breakout groups, if that would be helpful. Any questions on the actual content? I'm sure there are still questions on your task. So we'll make sure to give you more instruction for the task, but any questions on the content? Okay. So as you're coming up with these, and Armando, Susan, Greg, feel free to jump in as we talk a little bit more about breakout groups, but we'll want you all to be thinking again about where can you make a change, and think of these as actions. Sometimes even just starting off your strategy with an action, right, can be helpful to think about it as more of a strategy. If it helps you to think about the outcome you also want from that strategy, that's fine to add as well, like promote such and such in order to do whatever. Anna, I see you have a hand up.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm struggling a little bit thinking about how we transition from threats to strategies, because there are so many threats, and if at the end we are going to prioritize 4 strategies, so should we think about strategies for each of those threats, or are we going to prioritize threats first?
For right now, we're leaving it pretty open because we're still integrating feedback into the situation model. So I think if we end up having strategies that are on a threat that we end up kind of deeming as a pretty low threat, then it may not be a strategy we need to focus on, and we can continue to weed things out as we go through the prioritization. But today we want to leave it pretty broad and open just for brainstorming. Is that helpful?
Sorry, I was closing my windows. Yes, it's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, hopefully. And I'll just jump back on my screen so you all can see. We have these yellow hexagons here, and we also have an image of the situation model. Again, knowing that there's going to be lots of changes to the situation model. You don't have to use the model to orient yourselves. You can just type directly down here. But if you're typing, one of your strategies, maybe that's, create a community of practice, in order to share best practices, whatever that might be. If there's a place on the model that you think that has a more direct engagement, right, or is more applied in one place or the other, feel free when you're brainstorming on these hexagons over here. We'd love if you could kind of place, you don't have to do arrows, you can just kind of hover it where it might be best. If there's a detection process that about that could help with reducing disease transmission, go ahead and put that down here. We also understand that a lot of these will probably overlap if yours seems similar to someone else's, or if it seems more like a specific task and not quite a strategy. We'll help do kind of a lot of that grouping behind the scenes. So don't get caught up too much in whether it's right or wrong. Okay, I think the last thing to note is we have a lot of boards over here. So when we send you into breakout groups, we'll try and be pretty clear so that you and your group are only working in one space. It doesn't really matter if your strategy is on a different slide. We're just sending you into groups again, so you have some people to chat with and you're not working independently on this brainstorm. There are 2 groups down here, and the model is in here twice in Spanish if you want to work in Spanish specifically. Susan, anything you want to say about breakout groups or the structure of them?
No, I did create one that is for Spanish speakers. So if you want to, I think they also have the option to move themselves if they want to go to another room. Is that right?
Maybe. I'm not sure since I have hosted.
Okay, I'll have to look at that. If you don't want to be in the room you're in, you can request to be in another room, but I thought it might be easier because I know the consecutive translation takes time. So that might simplify things for this go round anyway.
Yeah, we want this to just be kind of a way for you all to meet each other in smaller groups and have a nice brainstorm. We'll probably be here for about 15 or 20 minutes.
Okay, Should I go on and open them?
Armando, do you have anything to add?
Just that maybe 20 minutes is about right.
Great. Let me put this in the chat just so you have it before you go off into your breakout groups. If you're not already in here, I think most people are, but please click it before you go off into your breakout group. Or hopefully someone in your group has it open. All right, Susan, whenever you're ready.
All right, here we go. So you should have been invited and you can just click join, I believe.
It's working, Susan.
Is it working?
Yeah, and I'll broadcast a message that they can, I tried to make this clear, but I'll broadcast a message that to make sure people are working in the group number that's on their slide.
I already see people in group 5, group 1, 2, 3, 4.
Me pongo. Digo, ¿dónde busco los?
En el chat.
En el chat.
Gabriel.
Hola, perdón.
Sí,
We
Gabriel.
can move people if we need to.
Sí.
Gabriel.
¿Quieres que te mueva al 5?
Sí, por favor.
¿A 5
Dale,
quién?
un ratito.
Gabriel. Gabriel.
Sí, Gabriel al 5.
Where is he now?
I don't know. I don't see him. Oh, he's in number 2. Why is he?
Is he in number 2? I don't. Oh, I do see him. Okay.
Yeah, I already moved him.
Oh,
to
thank
5.
you. You were fast on the hit the button.
Too many years of this.
Me too. I'd get it.
Gabriel is also on 5. He already left. Daniela.
Daniela Sosa.
Yeah.
Oh, I
Yeah,
see.
there's still about 5 or 6 people in this room. So just give us a shout or type in the chat if you're having problems joining your breakout group.
Okay, I moved Daniela.
She's in 5.
Yes.
But she's not leaving. Greg, Christina.
Oh, great. A few more people just went.
Eric.
And Susan, feel free to, I think we're just going to be doing this and bouncing from room to room. So feel free to stop the recording if you'd like.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Hang on just a second.
Okay, so I see people already working. I'm going to go to join in number 5 to take a look.
Great.
Okay.
All right. Well, welcome back, everyone. I know you all probably could have used more time. It seems like everyone was having great discussions and hopefully nice to meet people in a little bit smaller groups and get to know each other more. We are going to be taking these strategies that were brainstormed, and Armando and I will start to kind of lump the strategies and see where there's similarities across groups. And we'll work with you. We won't do any of that prioritization without you, we promise. We'll work with you all to start thinking about the criteria to be applied and how to start narrowing down that strategy list so that we can choose a few of those to start working on theories of change for. And we have a limited amount of time on session 3 to work on theories of change. So if something doesn't get prioritized for the specific workshop, it doesn't mean it's not something that some of these individual groups or the Western Hummingbird Partnership may not work on. But we want to build out some of those theories of change where we can most use your expertise because they're important and they're interesting for you all to contribute to. So just throwing that out there now. We do want to direct you, and maybe I will share my screen real quick, and I'll just show people the workshop website and let them know a little bit more about that. And then Susan, I'll let you wrap it up. But I'll send this link out. I think Susan's already sent it prior, but now that we're really in the workshop, hopefully it'll be an easy way for you all to access information, and we'll keep it updated over the next few days, and maybe even something that you can come back to as we're continuing to work on models and other pieces over the next few weeks. So there's just quick, schedule, a little bit more about us. And in the coordination here, you can see the agendas here for the next few days. So please take a look at that. We have ongoing workshop notes. We're all pretty busy as facilitators, so there's not a ton in there. But I know there's been some interest about getting the information out of the chat. So we may be able to kind of condense that and add that into these workshop notes. I know there were a lot of great links and questions and conversations happening in the chat. And then I also linked that bike rack. We'll add things throughout the workshop if necessary, but please feel free to access that slide. Background materials, there's hummingbird background information. There's also specific conservation standards resources if it's something that you're interested in or want a little bit more background in. And this is also where I'll upload the recordings. So all of you are still here. So, but if you missed the beginning of something, please feel free to watch the recording, or if you hear of others who are looking to access this information before tomorrow, this will be the place to do it. We'll have a page for each day. So tomorrow session 2 will come up and you can kind of follow along. So this is where we've been adding feedback throughout the workshop. Below, these are some of the presentations that Armando and I gave. We'll try and also add some of the presentations from those kind of flash presentations up here as well, the ones that we can post. And then there's additional links that may be helpful throughout this process. So we'll just keep this updated every day. I think that's all with the website. Again, hopefully an easy place, a one-stop shop for you guys to look at workshop information. Susan, do you want to talk a little bit about the general plan moving forward?
Sure. Yeah, I just want to say thanks to everybody for joining us today and for your support and participation in this process. And thanks to Jacqueline and Armando for their great work, to Claudia and Edmundo for their amazing translation. We really appreciate everything that you're doing for this. I want to emphasize the importance of coming back. This is just the start. We've identified threats, but what we really want to get to is how do we work towards protecting migratory hummingbirds? And so without completing the next 2 days, we can't get there or start to get there. So want to encourage your participation over these next 2 days as well. Again, it starts at the same time. So your time zone, and we have a variety of them with the same link. So you'll just come to the same place, same time tomorrow and Friday. And we look forward to moving forward with this. Greg, would you like to chime in?
No, just to double your thanks for everybody's participation. And I hope you learned something by being here today. I sure did. And I think there's a lot more for us to learn tomorrow and the next day. And we really appreciate your concern for hummingbirds and willingness to help us figure out what we can do to stop the declines.